Greetings and salutations. You are listening to the Into the North podcast, where we take a look at the competitive side of the Commander format, also known as CDH. I am one of your hosts, Sick Robot, aka Reed, and today I'm joined by my co-host, Morgan, aka Spleenface.
How's it going, everyone?
As well as our very special guest, Shaper.
Hello, thanks for having me on.
And Tara, please.
Hello. Lots of big names around, only slightly intimidated.
Now I'm sure our guests here need no introduction, but let's start it off by having you guys sort of introduce yourselves, telling us about how you got into CDH, and then sort of more specifically how you got involved with Razakats in the first place. Shaper, you want to take first?
Sure. I'm Shaper. I've been around since 2014. I got in with my college play group. And we like to go really hard, and we had a pretty wide and diverse meta. I've been following and adjusting and making new decks all the while, and Razakats is one of them.
Nice. Taro, how about you?
Well, I started playing Magic around when Oath of the Gatewatch came out, and at first I only played Standard and a bit of Modern, and then I discovered Commander, and it was the best thing ever, and we arms raced really hard in our playgroup and eventually found our way to CDH, where I at first played Flash Hulk, of course, but then Flash got banned and I needed a new deck. And when we were all in the Flash Hulk server trying to come up with new ways to make Hulk work, the list that I posted there was seen by a certain sick robot, and he told me, well, it looks like you just want to play Razakats. And I took a good look at the list, and turns out he was right. I just wanted to play Razakats, and therefore, thank you, Reed, for introducing me to the deck. In a way.
I have a keen eye for recognizing people that were playing Hulk, but I could tell didn't actually want to be playing Hulk and wanted to be playing other decks.
So you were in the Hulk server, all of you just huffing all the copium you could get your hands on.
Yes.
Hey, dude, I don't know. I have a very small, very dedicated group of people now that were extremely happy that Flash got banned.
You
anyway,
and Tim and no one else.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, moving on to our actual show topic. As you might have guessed, this is the Razakats special episode by the title, wherever you're listening to this or watching this. So this is gonna be a fun one. So I mean, as an introduction, right? Let's go over what Razakats actually is for any sort of uninformed viewer, anybody who doesn't actually super follow the CDH metagame, because while Razakats might be a semi-descriptive name, you might not be able to like fully figure out what that actually is from the name alone. So Morgan, do you want to sort of take it on just going over what Cats is at its base thing?
Sure. So Razakats is a mid-range Reanimator deck focused around the namesake card of Razaketh. And the idea is that you play usually Thrasios and Tymna, though we're going to talk about some other sort of variants and ideas. And then you have like a decent, mid-range plan with your commanders. And then you try and cheat out a big fatty, hopefully Razaketh. And then there's combos of varying levels of conciseness that you can use to win the game from like a very low starting resource state with Razaketh.
Yeah. And I mean, like, I would say from an outsider point of view, I mean, I've played some Razakats, but I haven't necessarily put in a huge amount of time into the deck. I'd say it's like the closest that you the closest analog to like a legacy style Reanimator list that you can get in CDH, right?
Yes, I would agree.
Of course, with Grizzlebrand being banned, Grizzlebrand being banned in CDH, we can't really do that. Emrakul isn't quite as good here, where you can only annihilate her one person at a time. So it's sort of like the closest analog that you can get to like just reanimating a fatty and try to win the game sometimes.
I think
not deterministically.
To an extent, yes, but it's much less like my understanding of Legacy Reanimator is that it's sort of a much more like all-in or focused deck where you're just trying to do it kind of as fast as possible. And while like there are certainly early reanimations and early wins in this deck, I think your game plan is a little bit more, like as I said, mid-rangey. You know, you develop mana, play dorks, leverage Thrasios and Tymna, draw some cards, and then go for the win without needing a huge amount of onboard setup, or needing to telegraph it super hard, but just sort of being able to, when you feel the time is right, as opposed to just trying to like turbo it out the way something like Legacy does.
Yeah, definitely fair. I would say that like, would you guys say that Razakats is sort of just like one of the quintessential mid-range decks in CDH as well at this point?
At this
Absolutely.
point, I would say so, yes.
Yeah, it's definitely a list that's sort of in its base form. Obviously, you see like grindier versions and faster versions of like any deck in CDH, but I think in its base form, it's really focused around like accruing a slow advantage and having like pretty efficient win cons and pretty like resilient win cons.
Yes.
So yeah, so that actually takes us into sort of the beginning of our next segment here after that introduction of sort of like the history of cats. So getting up to speed with where we are now, because obviously there's been a fair amount of evolution on the deck. It sort of came around to be when Razakats was printed in summer of 2017. So we've had about 4 years to iterate on it at this point. So it's obviously come a long way. So I mean, Shaper, if you want to sort of run us through the history, maybe start with like where the name comes from.
Sure. So the Razakats name actually comes from a couple of the Leonins, which were really important in the development of the original lines. Probably the most iconic one is the Animate Dead Leonin Relic Order combo, which basically creates an infinite death loop that you can outlet with something like Blood Artist, or if you have a Razaketh in play, you can manipulate trigger stacking such that you can pull infinite tutors out of it, gated by your life total. There's also in the original build there was a line with Leonin Squire that then got replaced with Eternal Witness that essentially let you recur LED by sacrificing the Leonin Squire or the Eternal Witness to get your LED or get to a reanimate, which let you recur your LED, which lets you kind of net up mana as you go. Cats came about in 2017, kind of in response to an uptick of Blood Pod that had just come out. It was a really popular deck. It was kind of aimed against the kind of Paradox Engine meta that had a lot of Thrasios, and there were a lot of ad nauseum decks in 3-color at the time. People were playing things like Doomtide Thrasios, and we had just started advancing Hulk strategies. So naturally, people wanted to slow down the meta and kind of attack it in a different way. And so Blood Pod became really popular, and so there were a lot of rule of laws. There was just a lot of grindiness, and this deck kind of sat in a role in which it could outgrind the other decks at the table and take wins that way.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, it's sort of been like a long time in evolution at this point, but it sort of started out of a place of like sort of wanting to go over more interactive and stack strategies with like sort of just like superior value engines, I think, right? Especially also with having I think a big thing in the original days was having like a win con that you could cheat into play being Razaketh, but also in later stages of the game, just like being able to hardcast it as a creature, which is like pretty hard to counter for the most part in a lot of CDH games. People aren't really playing a lot of like actual factual counterspell or delay or stuff like that. So he's like hardcasting cats sort of lets you bypass a lot of the stuff like Dispel, Flusterstorm, things like that people are trying to play.
One of the other strengths of the decks is its threat density. You have a lot of opportunities to put a big fatty on the board that will win the game if it's unanswered, whether that's Razaketh itself or Jengataxius or Vilis now or Consecrated Sphinx. The reanimations let you put that into play multiple times, and so it took a lot of interaction to keep you off your wins, and it's really just too difficult to do that indefinitely if other people don't win on top of you.
Yeah, definitely. So I know, Shaper, you sort of mentioned that the early days of the in early days of Cats, you sort of started off by doing like reanimation stuff with like Lean and Squire and that kind of stuff. I'm assuming lines have sort of progressed from that point, obviously, right? Because you obviously noted that we've sort of gone from Lead and Squire stuff to Eternal Witness stuff.
That happened really early in the process.
Yeah.
I kind of just realized along the way that Eternal Witness was just a higher quality card in general. It was much less narrow than Leon and Squire, but the deck got named before that change got made. It was featuring a lot of cats, and I do everything in my power to keep it featuring cats.
I mean, and it did play. It played the Leon and Relic order. I mean, for years, right? And it was
Yes.
It was only supplanted with the printing of Oracle,
Exactly.
which simplified a lot of the lines.
By a lot.
Darn you, Oracle, simplifying lines for all these combo decks.
I think it's also like worth noting that Razakats also had like very much a reputation as a very difficult deck to play. Like the old lines were sort of mana and card intensive enough that like I saw a lot of people mess up their combos. Like, you know, one of the normal pieces is in the graveyard and you're like, I have 16 life. Is this good enough? And so
it was very similar to Doomsday in that regard.
Yeah,
where you have to
like,
sit and think with your Razaketh in your hand on whether or not you can make it happen with what's in your deck and what's in your graveyard.
Yeah, and then with the printing of Oracle, the lines just got like so much simpler. The amount of life you need in the base case is way down, because you're not trying to set up some like it used to be. You know, you'd do the like Eternal Witness LED thing like 3 or 4 times to net mana, and now you don't have to do that anymore. So I think this is a deck that like some people were scared away from in the past. That maybe if you look again, it's a little less complicated than it was before.
It is still probably one of the harder decks to play.
Yeah, but I think it's harder in terms of more like on a macro level, like figuring what your role is in a pod and how you're going to play the game, as opposed to like, I got my Razaketh, how do I win?
That's the easy part now.
Yes.
But I agree that it's not the easiest deck to play.
Yeah, I think that's honestly kind of a good transition.
Yeah. Because I think a lot of what we're sort of looking to talk about next is sort of like where Cats is positioned in matchups, metagame, maybe recently, but also like historically, and sort of like this like the quote unquote matchup spread. Obviously, CDH doesn't particularly have like great single matchup spread type concepts for a lot of its decks since you're playing at a 4-person pod, but we can sort of like go through and sort of tell our viewers like in sort of like a more aggressive pod how it does, and a Staxier pod how it does, and a more like interactive and not so Staxy pod how it does, and that kind of stuff. And then maybe like some silver bullets that like you maybe never want to see or stuff like that if that exists. But I think maybe first let's sort of talk about like its recent positioning, right? Like what does Cats look like right now in the metagame?
I think it's like quite well positioned. Particularly something we can talk about more in other parts of it. It's a very flexible deck, both in terms of like how you play it in a given game, but also in terms of how you construct it. Like you could build it to be, you know, on the faster side and put in some things that just let you play the game like a lot better on the early turns, or you can put in like some more hate bears that are specific to your meta or like extra interaction. And so like I think that especially if you know what you're playing against, you can adjust it quite well. And in terms of like direct, obviously, you know, 1v1 matchups aren't the greatest tool to look at in CDH, because obviously, you know, you have 3 opponents, not 1. But I think that this is a deck that doesn't really have like, you never sit down, see one other commander and just go like, oh no, there's a 0% chance I'm winning this game. It doesn't have like any of the decks that actually just sort of dunk on it. Though obviously in like there are pods where like if all of your opponents are doing certain things, then it could be a little more rough.
I think that sort of speaks to the I'd say diversity of threats and sort of resilience of win cons in the deck as well, right? Because like just the fact that you're attacking on so many different potential axes sort of means that you don't really have any silver bullets that you're particularly weak to, which I think is definitely correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that is sort of like a huge strength in especially blind meta games, right? Where
sure.
you sort of have like realistic answers to most things, or like paths to navigate most board states.
Yeah, I totally agree. I've never encountered a meta in which I'd say that Razakats is completely useless. I don't think it exists at all.
And especially with things like being able to tune your deck list at it, like I think it's also something like the packages as standalones, I'd say, in Cats are fairly open to sort of tuning toward lesser speed, more speed. Obviously, Reanimation is a very fast package on its own, so you can sort of tune toward that direction, and then also having value in the command zone and a lot of good pieces to be able to go into long games sort of lends itself to being able to tune toward long games as well if needed.
Yes.
So actually, I know, Shaper, you might not have been as active maybe in, like open competitive circles recently. Tara and Spleen, I sort of want to ask about your recent experiences with the deck. Just because I think it's sort of a good place to jump off with that. Maybe sort of less speaking in broad terms about the mythical metagame at large and more about like your personal experiences with how you've sort of been working with the deck.
Yes. Well, for
sure,
me,
Tara, why don't you go first?
Yeah, for me the deck has been performing really, really well, which is actually surprising because my meta has gotten really, really fast. I play in a Grixis Storm meta. There's ad nauseous everywhere, breach everywhere. Our games end on average on turn 3, and typically that's a meta where we'd say maybe that's not the best suited for Razakats, but the deck is adaptable enough that I was able to change some things around, and I'm performing very well even in that hostile meta.
Yeah, I would say my personal meta is probably a little bit slower than average. I play with one of the people I play with most often is like really, really big into mono blue and Urza specifically, so that's a matchup I see a lot. But I found that like even in sort of more open metas, at the first tier 1 con tournament, which I took the list to, there was actually a surprising amount of maybe not like dedicated stacks decks, but certainly like hate bear decks. Like for some reason I saw a ton of the like Timna Sakashima hate bear type strategy, and I ended that tournament undefeated. So it certainly like even though ostensibly there were lots of cards that like are problems for the deck, cards like Aethersworn Canonist and Deafening Silence, or even just regular Rule of Laws, things like Lavinia. I was able to sort of like with some careful planning and play, navigate through those pods and try and just leverage advantage in the long game to get through there. I think the Marchesa tournament was a little bit faster. There was more of like the Nas stuff going on. So then in that case you have to be a little bit more careful on those early turns. Like I was making sure not to just be tapping out early, trying to keep hands with interaction, but and also not get beaten down by like 7,000 Nagilas, because apparently they were out in force. But
people still think Nagila's a good deck. Who would have guessed?
Yeah, I know, right? Wild. Hey, wait, Nagila Razaka? So yeah, that like that tournament had a little bit of a different meta. There was still a good mix. Like I saw stacks decks, I saw control decks, but there was probably on balance more fast stuff, and the deck still seemed to work all right.
So can I ask a question to you, Spleen? As you approached the Marchesa tournament, you saw what was popular, what was talked about online, this, that, and the other thing. What made you choose cats to bring to the tournament? What was your internal reasoning?
I had I for a while had been thinking that like cats was certainly like one of the best options, probably up there with like the Thrasios Vial concept or some Timnachrom concept. I think that like partners are just super strong. But yeah, hot takes, I know. But having the cheap commanders for like the commander free interaction spells, having the value in the command zone gives you that flexibility. And I particularly, I think one of my favorite things about this deck is the resilience to Drannith Magistrate, which is like a card that I'm often fine even just leaving in play for my opponents. So I figured that like it's a deck that can play into any matchup, and if you are going to be winning, if you're trying to win a tournament, like even just having, for example, like 2 pods where you sit down and you're like, this is going to be really really hard to win, or like if you have 1 pod that's just like a matchup loss, and then like 1 pod where you like go last and just have a bad mulligan, then like you're already gonna be like really struggling to make it to like whatever the cutoff is, especially when there's like almost 200 people in the tournament. So I wanted to be able to have a chance to win every game I played. And I think Cats is one of the best decks for that. And I also figured I could adapt it decently well to what I was expecting to see, which was why I was playing like I put in the Cyclonic Rift, just as like the safety valve against like the stacks matchups that sometimes manifested. And it actually, like, it would have saved me. There was a pod with both Winota and Yasharn in it, and I was literally building up, and I'd finally got the mana to cast the Psych Rift, and then the server crashed, but like it actually would have won me that game more or less single-handedly, which was kind of the idea when I put it in the deck. And so yeah, it just felt like a deck with a lot of flexibility. I could play in any game, and I could try and tweak it to have all the answers that I thought I would need.
Awesome. That actually a bit of the talk around there for I'd say just like having matchup losses and stuff sort of makes me want to like get into this next sort of sub point here, which is sort of talking about the sort of like the turbo stacks mid range, like RPS or triangle, that we're sort of like currently seeing, but this is also sort of the split of decks that you see in CH classically, and sort of like how Cats sort of functions into that. Because I'd say, like, from a naive perspective looking in, Cats probably does like fairly well, or probably does its best work in mixed pods. But like what are you like wanting to see, like matchup wise, like across all the decks at a table when you sit down, and like what out of like maybe like all turbo, all stacks, all mid range versus like a mix of some of those, like what do you think is the combination that you're like, say just blind stock Cats list, what are you least likely or like least happy to see at a table?
So when I'm picking Cats into a table, what I want to see is I want to see other decks that are looking to interact, whether that's putting stacks on the board or playing a lot of control or wanting to set up value engines so that they can accomplish one of those things. I want to not have to deal with any of that because I know that I have the threat density to overcome that, and I have the grind tools to push ahead in the mid game. What you don't want to see is a bunch of selfish decks at the table. You really don't want people to just go win attempt, and not be able to stop them. And if you do, you really want your silver bullets to be able to stop all of those all of those decks that you're facing. Sometimes Collector Oof can do that, which is, I think part of why it's pretty reasonably positioned right now. Is there's a lot of artifact stuff going around with Dockside and LED combos and whatnot, and an early Oof can shut off multiple decks. But I feel like you really don't want to play it into something where you're getting just hammered with win con attempts over and over again. I think that's probably its worst matchup.
But it actually I think works for me. I mean, it's obviously not the best meta for Cats, because I agree that in the meta with more interaction and slower decks, Cats performs even better, but it performs very well in my Fast North meta, so it can do stuff.
But would you describe the meta as like inhospitable to the deck somewhat, or do you think that you're pretty confidently positioned?
My deck is heavily tagged against the meta, so that helps. But in general, I think it would be a hostile meta for Razakats, yes.
Yeah, do you want to talk about some of the specific tools that you bring to that table?
I mean, I think we'll cover them later in the single card discussion, but yeah, sure, I can. The things like slightly more counter spells, like Force of Negation, and cards like Ranger Captain of Eos, which has been amazing, and even things like Lavinia, which has also worked surprisingly well.
Yeah, so I think those specific tools, specifically Lavinia and Ranger Captain, kind of exert that force where they put a stop to all of a specific kind of deck, putting forward win attempts, and so that lets you grind out while they're trying to find a way around your piece.
Yes.
And then you can take hold of the game by holding up additional counter magic, or outgrinding them, or sticking a fatty and drawing so many cards nobody can deal with you, or whatever it is.
Exactly.
So actually, I think that's a super great place to just get into. I think we'll actually hop right into single card discussion right now, because I think this is a great segue, and I think it's something that we should really talk about. And then we maybe talk about general build directions for decks afterward. But I think this is a great place to just hop into single card discussion and sort of talk about. We were talking before about the vague. You can make package swaps to alter your deck to tailor to any of these metas, but I think this is really where we'll be talking about what those package and card swaps actually are, and sort of talk about the differences that they make, and have opinions and well thought through and well articulated arguments about what you guys think are the best swaps. It's always great to have some disagreement on a podcast.
Do we want to start with some of our deck differences? Or do we want to start with specific cards?
You know what? Why don't you guys talk about quickly just what sort of the differences between your guys' stock lists and what you sort of feel comfortable playing with right now are? Because I think that's a great place to start with, sort of the base differences that you guys are looking at between your lists right now.
So my build in Taros differs by 4 non-land cards. I am playing Dark Ritual, Ponder, Bloom Tender, Fabro Elder, and Jingataxius is actually 5. And Taro is playing Dispel, Intuition, Lavinia, Force of Negation, and Ranger Captain of Eos. So what that really looks like, the difference, is that I'm playing cards that push toward mid-range, with additional mana from Bloom Tender, Dark Ritual, Fabro Elder, and Taro's trying to survive the early game with cards like Dispel and Lavinia and Force of Negation.
Exactly. That's exactly what I'm trying to do with those slots.
And then
it has worked well.
Yeah, here, and then I'm the wacky one.
And then Spleen's playing all sorts of not too wacky things. Spleenface is playing cards. The cards Spleenface is playing that are different than my build are Nature's Claim, Swords to Plowshares, Eternal Witness in place of Luris, Dark Confidant, Loyal Retainers in place of Necromancy, Dispel, Gitaxian Probe, and Cyclonic Rift.
Yeah, so some of these are cards that I wouldn't necessarily put if I was trying to make like if I was going to write a primer, for example. I don't think that Cyclonic Rift would be in the list, because it was there for it's an open tournament meta call, where sometimes you come
just
up
want a reset
button
button
that has Jisharn in it, and you're like, wait a
We
minute.
sort of talked about this on our tournament prep episode, where it's like I feel like going into a tournament, you always have to expect that like one random stack deck that just somehow has all the silver bullets to stop you from doing your thing, and they just like get them into play somehow, and you just need an out to that, right?
Yeah, and I know some of the more turbo decks have put in Rushing River to that end, which only bounces 2, but
I think Rushing River ends up being more powerful in the mid game for them, whereas Cyclonic Rift is something that you want to reach the end game with. I also think specifically their mana is being attacked more, so it's harder for them to quite reach Cyclonic Rift mana without reaching the very late game. So I think it makes sense for them in context where Cyclonic Rift would be a little better here.
More, when there's See, when there's like a rule of law and when there's a rule of law and like I don't know, Grafdigger's Cage, Razakats can cast Cyclonic Rift pretty easily, but when there's a rule of law and Null Rod, like Timnacrom can't really cast Cyclonic Rift.
Yeah.
So yeah, I definitely agree with like I don't think those decks are looking to play Rushing River. I just meant like being able to answer multiple pieces of having at least one tool that answers multiple pieces of like hate bears against you. I also toyed with the idea of putting Force of Vigor in that slot. But I think the thing that made me not want to do that most was actually the printing of Archon of Emeria, and also to an extent Opposition Agent, which are
Do you want to talk about Force of Vigor versus your choice of Nature's Claim?
Yeah, so I made the swap, and then I realized that this the problem is it all ties through. Since I'm not playing Bomberman or Auriok Saboteurs to go with the Lion's Eye Diamond, my backup win con is actually it's a sort of weird Razaketh fueled Twister loop with Hull Breacher. And in order to fuel your Razaketh tutors, you need to gain life somehow, and that's what Nature's Claim does.
Nature's Claim your own things to continue this loop.
I mean, you're Nature's Claiming a Hull Breacher treasures. So
yeah. It's just,
but yeah.
So,
If that wasn't a concern for you, would you play Force of Vigor in that slot?
I would certainly consider it. I think ultimately, the more I played with Force of Will, knowing myself, I think I'd come to the conclusion that I like casting my dorks too much to play Force of Vigor, but certainly it's like, yeah, it's a card that I've seen just be like extremely strong in a lot of different decks and metas, so it's certainly like a card I'd be interested in trying.
I would like to say before I sort of push to another discussion here that I love that Morgan is like, while the rest of all of the Razaketh lists are trending towards simplifying Razaketh lines through Oracle and just doing like having like all the complexity of play be in sort of the pre-Razaketh stuff and your game plan stuff, Morgan's pushing back toward WinCon complexity with weird Hull Breacher Twister loops.
But it is a really sweet line. I respect it.
Raza-fueled Breacher Twister lines. That's the future. This is what peak performance looks like. I'm gonna be honest that I have never done that.
I mean,
literally,
I
was like, I don't think I need. I was like, I don't think I need. The Bomberman, and also I was putting in Collector Roof, so I was like, this is not a combo that I want to be like naturally assembling, and I generally don't see Praetor's Grasp that often, so I was like, no one takes my Oracle, and like this also isn't a deck that's super appealing to target with Praetor's Grasp. Like obviously you can take the Oracle, which is nice, but decks with Praetor's Grasp are often looking to take things like Dockside or Breach.
Yes, I agree.
Or Adnaz, none of which this deck runs. So,
the reanimation also gives you access to other people's oracles in some scenarios.
Yeah, it can definitely happen. So I was like, well, I guess I don't need the Bomberman, and then people were like, so what are you gonna do if your oracle gets exiled? And I was like, well, Razaketh beats, and then I was like, but I feel like I'd done some math. It actually was before Hullbreacher was with Smothering Tithe on like some weird loops. With like Thrasios, Twister, Smothering Tithe, like a Windfall. Like there was like this whole, you get a whole bunch of cards in hand, and then you Windfall your way through the deck, netting mana, and then you Twister back and start again. So then I was like, well, the Hullbreacher actually makes this a lot better because you don't have to let your opponents draw cards, and like it just works.
There's also something to be said about the power of Razaketh Softlock, where you just have complete control of the game because you've been able to assemble like a Hull Breacher combo and have a Razaketh on the board to tutor up interaction at whim. There's even some other lines you can do, like if you are able to silence the table, you can wheel into other people's win cons and reanimate them. There's just a lot you can do with a Razaketh and a full board that means you don't really have to over consider your win cons, I think.
Yeah,
I agree.
for sure. Like, honestly, coming up with the line was more like a response to being challenged on, like, okay, you're in turns and your oracle's gone. Like, how are you actually winning? And I was like, well, I guess you can do this, but it's not like, it's not a real play pattern. It's honestly more.
It's theoretical.
Yes.
So actually, I did see at the beginning of this whole discussion with Shaper listing off deck differences. One of the key ones that I heard and that I definitely wanted to get discussion on, because sort of coming from the outside, I haven't really heard a lot of like in-depth discussion about this one, and I really wanted to hear opinions on this, which was the Luris and Ewit difference, right? Obviously, deck started with Lean and Squire, moved to Ewit. Luris was printed, and Luris obviously serves some of the same role in Ewit in terms of leaping with LED to regain mana. So I really wanted to hear a lot about, or just at least a bit about discussion why you prefer one over the other.
If you haven't heard much of that discussion, then you definitely haven't been involved with
Correct.
Discussions around cats.
Yeah, this is one of the more hotly debated points, I
Like
think.
honestly, the debate.
Luris is a
really
cat.
matter
I think
that
that ends the discussion for the most part. No, I'm just
yes,
kidding.
of course. But
So I think Luris tends to serve a more mid-rangey role in which you are able to do things like recycle your animate enchants or recur a dead Draneth Magistrate or things along those lines. It's a little nicer at accruing value over time than Eternal Witness. Eternal Witness is more flexible. It can pull back tutors. It can give you a chance at an entomb if something went wrong. It also importantly plays around Draneth Magistrate, which I think is probably the biggest point in its favor.
Yeah, that's definitely my like, I go back and forth on like the value case of both of them. Obviously, like, Luris has a much higher ceiling of like I'll replay my fish every 3 turns, or like I'm buying back like things that were killed, or like I'm just gonna jam animate dead every turn until it resolves, or things like that. But like I've liked the flexibility on Eternal Witness. Eternal Witness has returned silence to my hand an unreasonable number of times. Like, that card just like being able to try silent, like, you're like, okay, I'm gonna play silence, I'm gonna back it up with like 2 or 3 counter spells. Alright, I didn't get there. Well, okay, I'll E with the silence and then pass the turn, and then like next turn I'll try it all again. But yeah, the fact that like being able to win through Draneth Magistrate is like very nice.
But you can win with
additional-
Luris through Draneth's Magistrate as well. You just don't use Luris. You need a single black mana. It's not that bad.
Well, you need like it turns off some of the it increases your resource requirements a little bit, not a lot, admittedly. But the other thing for me is that it like I like not being tempted to remove it, you know? Like
Okay.
I could when there's when it's out, if I was playing Luris, I could see myself very often being like, oh well, if I kill this Draneth, just like it's the end step, I have like maybe I have one of my commanders but not both. I have this Abrupt Decay. I'm like angling for Razakats sometime in the next couple turns. I'll just kill the Draneth, I'll develop my other commander, and then like it'll be smooth sailing when I finally reanimate it. Like I actively like leaving Draneth Magistrate in play whenever I can, and just being able to have my minimum resource requirements.
I'm on Luris currently, and I think my rebuttal to the Draneth Magistrate point is that in games in which a Draneth Magistrate is kind of dominating the table, you do have more time to grind through it to the additional resources that you need to do the combo anyway. I think like the Luris Ewit stuff is most powerful in the early game when it's when you need to do it to net mana up and you're trying to combo off with very little resources. And being able to do that through Draneth Magistrate is nice, but I also see a lot of line options in which you just kind of play through it and don't worry about that too much.
I agree in theory, but in my experience, the most common sources of Draneth Magistrates is other Thrasios and Tymna decks. And if you're playing like against a Draneth Magistrate, you're often playing a Thrasios or Tymna deck. And if you're playing a Thracius or Tymna deck and your opponent's playing a Thracius and Tymna deck, then just taking the time to accrue the resources you need to answer it is a line of play that can be risky.
Yeah, that's true.
But certainly, like, if the sources of your opposing Drannith Magistrates are not, like, random TNT mid-range piles, then certainly it would be, like, much less of a direct concern. But that's
Yeah, if
just
I see an opposing
the
Drannith
ones I
in my
see.
meta, I'm super happy about it, and I want that Drannith to live.
Yeah, that's
Even
fair.
if it makes my Raza combos cost a single black mana, which is... I'll gladly pay that single black mana.
Yeah, I guess it is not.
I think it's pretty reasonable to make either decision, especially depending on what you see at the table and where you want your deck to be strong. I
Yeah.
could see playing both.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Honestly,
I actually, sorry, it could
playing either. Yeah.
playing
Not
either,
playing
not
both.
both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
Um,
never play both.
Honestly, I think if Luris was like a 2/3, I might actually
Yeah,
like,
the 3-2 stat line does
Like,
present some
I've-
issues, but
I've heard a bunch of people
Yeah.
comment that like it's a good Tymna attacker, and like honestly, I think Ewit is the better Tymna attacker, because it's just so much less tempting to block.
But Luris makes
like,
your dogs much better Tymna attackers because
well, that's
You can just
kind of along
replay
the
them.
lines of this spell is much more tempting to counterspell, sort of, and I don't always drive with that reasoning.
Well, but it's not about casting. It's about like in the context of Tymna, like that is actually like a reasonable. I don't think that's like a good comparison when talking about the effect of a spell in and of itself. But I think when you're talking about how it synergizes with other cards and in a free for all context, I think that those are like more relevant considerations. Like I don't know, like confidant blocking is like, you know, a whole thing like, oh, do you swing a Tymna into a Dark Confidant, or like a Najila into a Dark Confidant, or like a Luris into a Dark Confidant, whereas like I will swing an Eternal Witness into a Dark Confidant and I will
Not
be
worry about it at all. 'Cause
confident
you already
that they won't block. Sorry.
and you already got you already got the value out of the Eternal Witness anyway because it has a need to be trigger.
Yeah, like it's a 2/1 with no text, and so like people won't dedicate resources to trying to answer it.
And to be
Like,
clear,
even-
it's not even about like necessarily like having a block knocking the Tymna trigger, but it could also be valuable to just like have the body in play for Razakats stuff, right? So like having a body around that people
Yes.
are less likely to block is valuable just in the case of having like your two creatures in play that you sort of want around to do Razakats stuff in the future.
Yeah, that too.
Great. So I sort of want to cut this off here because I know we could talk about a lot of these single card discussions forever, and we sort of want to get
Yes.
through them in a reasonable amount of time. So let's move on to the next one that we
Well,
have here.
actually, one last thing I just want to quickly mention about Luris is that he enables an intuition pile with Bomberman while he's on the board with LED, Auric Savages, and an Animate Dead or Dance of the Dead, which has actually been kind of relevant. But I guess considering
Luris pulling back LED in random scenarios is actually really helpful for negating some of the mana costs of specifically Bomberman combo, which Spleen Face is not on, and Tarot and I
yeah,
both
exactly.
am.
Yeah, that's also like certainly I can see the argument that when you're more likely to use your LED for things that aren't, I already have Razaketh in play, then Luris becomes a lot more valuable.
Yeah.
I guess
Great.
also if you play Necromancy, then cracking the LED, but that's
We could use this segue to talk about Bomberman combo.
Certainly.
Why did you omit it, Spleen?
I mean, I sort of mentioned this earlier. I just felt it wasn't super necessary. I don't like discarding my hand without a way to like find interaction. Like the thing that I like about both Breach combos and Razaketh combos in the context of LED based combos is that often you're not actually going shields down when you crack it. Like with Razaketh, you have an extra creature, you can just tutor interaction, or like Breach, you can just cast something out of the bin. but just blind pitching your hand with Bomberman has always been something I'm like not super comfortable with. And I play in like very interactive metas.
I mean, the saying is always that like Bomberman is a 3-card combo, right? You always need the silence with Bomberman to make it like an actual combo.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's...
I don't know how true that is, but...
It's
I
definitely
mean,
more or
that's
less
not
true
true.
depending on who you play with. The problem is I play with sandbaggers like Reed, so you know. And also, like, the fact that when I cut it, I was also putting in collector oof. And at the time, I was also toying with the idea of putting in, like, a couple more hate bears that I think we're going to talk about later, that also would have stopped it as a combo. Because, like, so, you know, Collector Oof doesn't stop the Razakats combo because you just sack it to Razakats.
Yes.
But it does stop manually assembling Bomberman. And so it was like, this is a combo that's going to be hated out by this hate piece I'm adding in. Feels unnecessary because it's never been a problem for me that, like, my win cons are exiled or whatever. I don't particularly like it just like as an inclusion in the deck. I always seem to draw it, and like I guess it's not so much about cracking the LED, it's about like I would draw Auriok Salvagers and be like, I don't want to, like, I don't feel comfortable just like tutoring LED here and trying to win. So like in the metas I was playing in, it didn't feel like an A+B. It was like, I'd rather use this tutor for something, a little bit safer, like either a value engine or like setting up a reanimate combo. So like my experience was just, I'm drawing half this combo and not wanting to tutor the other half.
Yeah, that's all super reasonable. Do you want to talk a little bit about how it functions in your Metal Tarot?
It functions amazingly well. I actually win more with manual Bomberman than I win with manual Oracle Consult. Which is strange, but it's the truth. I actually took a look at our playgroup stats to tell you how many of my Razakats wins are actually with manual Bomberman assembly, and it's actually almost 30%, which is a lot. And
do you think there are factors that contributes to that?
I do, to an extent. One of them is that a lot of these wins are very early, and I play against a lot of these greedy Edna's Breach decks. They just throw out a ton of mana rocks and then attempt to win, and then someone stops the first win, and if you Bomberman then, it turns out to work really well. And it also, I think, has something to do with the fact that my playgroup knows how to play against Razakats. And whenever they see like a survival or a Raza in the graveyard or anything like that, the alarm bells start ringing, but nobody ever sees Bomberman coming if it's manually assembled.
One other thing I forgot to mention is that my gameplay experience is often extremely centered around Mystic Remora and Rhystic Study, both of which function as like soft stacks for the Bomberman combo. I could also see if I was just getting randomly wheeled a lot, that Bomberman might be a combo that like I was more into because it's decently easy to like get either piece out of the graveyard, right? Either you just activate
Yes.
like if you've had your LED milled or whatever, like wheeled out of your hand or milled or anything like that, just activate the salvagers, or like if the salvagers gets milled and you draw LED,
just reanimate it.
Just reanimate it. So that certainly like
and
makes
also
a lot
many
of
of
sense.
the assembly pieces work pretty well with it. Like you can easily find salvagers with like survival or with neoform, which are cards that are amazing in the deck anyway.
Yeah, no, and also, I mean, to an extent, I think if I was, getting wheeled on average once every 2 or 3 turns, which like I have seen in some of the places I've played,
it happens.
I might
happens.
feel a little bit more comfortable about the occasional risky LED crack as well.
Yeah.
Great.
But actually, regarding Bomberman, one thing I want to say is I don't actually think that Praetor's Grasp and losing your Oracle is actually a good argument for Bomberman, because like we said, Razakats is not really a deck that gets Praetor's Grasp a lot. And there are tons of Praetor's Grasps in my meta, and I can maybe remember 1 or 2 times where people Praetor's Grasped me and they never took the Oracle. Once they took an LED and once they took a Silence. I actually think the Bomberman argument is more about using it as an additional combo instead of a backup.
I honestly think that, like, the most of the times I've been targeted with a Praetor's Grasp, they were basically looking at it as an extract. Like, it was just like, because I think when you untap on your turn, you know, like, you've got Loyal Retainers or whatever, I'm not going to be able to counter your win. So if I just take your Oracle, then, like, maybe I can stop you from winning. Is like what happens more than I'm targeting your, like a desperation move sort of thing.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Is what happens more than, like, I'm going to target you and take your Oracle and try and consult.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, when they do that, when they take your Oracle and try and consult, then, like, your Oracle is in play on somebody else's field, which is, like, moderately annoying to get back, but certainly not impossible.
Especially with your deck chock full of Reanimation. And actually, on that topic with Reanimation, and Morgan, you had mentioned Loyal Retainers. There's actually another point of discussion that I wanted to get through here. We actually, on our single card discussion here, have Retainers versus Necromancy, but it's I feel like it's less about a 1v1 swap and more about the decision-making sort of architecture around this, and, like, what situations you want Necromancy in, what situations you want Retainers in. Maybe is there a case where you would want both, potentially neither?
Yes, so I was originally, like, when I first put Loyal Retainers in, I didn't take Necromancy out. And then I, like, sort of came back to it after and decided that, like, I only have the 2 reanimate targets as opposed to, like, the 3 that have been sort of more historically in the list.
There used to be 4. And we used to play Loyal Retainers too.
Yeah. So, like, I only have 2, so sort of just density was, like, less of an issue. But honestly, the biggest... It's, like, kind of weird because in many ways, Loyal Retainers is actually... like, it's not that it gets cast instead of Necromancy, it actually gets cast instead of Spellseeker more than anything else. And what that is when you're doing survival of the fittest lines, you know, you pitch something, find Razakats, pitch Razakats. Used to be find Spellseeker, finds Reanimate.
Yes.
And I basically went through every piece of interaction that sees play in CEDH, and the only one that doesn't hit that is Dispel. And then, I mean, I guess, like, Nature's Claim doesn't hit it either, but with Loyal Retainers, almost nothing hits it. Like, they need Pact, Force, Mana Drain, or, like, something weird. Because, like, Spellseeker can be blasted, the Reanimate can be swatted, and then anything that counters non-creature spells counters Reanimate. So basically, this makes, once the survival lands, it just turns, like, almost all interaction off for the purposes of stopping that Razakats from getting into play. Which is what I
and once the
putting it in.
And once the Razakats is in play, there's a wall of interaction as big as the number of creatures you have. So it's much less.
Yes, but if
you
have to combo off with minimal resources, people can then stop you with, and you are left with an empty hand and empty board except for Razakats, and that means you can cast your commander next turn and probably go off again. But depending on the meta, it's maybe not an ideal situation.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, spending all your Razakats tutors and not winning is never where you want to be. But as whiffed combos go, for example, casting Oracle and then having the consult be countered, and then just being stuck with your Oracle in play is a lot less good than your Razakats being stuck in play. Quote, heavy air quotes around stuff.
Yes.
Definitely better than having a lot of other things stranded in play, I'll tell you what.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
But usually, at least I think that in a meta like mine, if I have a Razakats stranded in play, no creatures left to do the further interaction to protect myself, I'm not getting another turn.
Yeah, that's definitely fair. I think that it's, like, a pretty edge case thing either way. The number of times where Razakats hits the board and I don't win that turn is like very, very low.
Yes, I
Like,
mean,
probably
it totally is.
it's like 95% plus, I would say, and then
Yeah.
like the rest of it is like quibbling about, you know, what's the use case in this already like 5% scenario is not.
That's true, but I
Super
think
relevant.
I have to go off with fewer creatures more often than I guess you guys might have to.
Yeah, that's definitely fair. Like the Spellseeker, and I will say when I built my meme Zerda deck, which can't play Spellseeker if you have Zerda as a companion, so it had to
True.
be Loyal Retainers. I didn't play Life Death, and like then I really felt it because like at the time I was more used to doing Spellseeker stuff,
Yep.
and I was like, when I play Razakats, when I Spellseeker, like I never need the Life Death. I always have 2 creatures, and then like not having Life Death, and then also like Loyal Retainer sacrifices itself, so having that 1 less creature,
Yeah.
and not having like 2 and 3 mana commanders, actually came back, and I was like, there was like more than once where the fact that I didn't have them was like a big problem.
Yeah.
So I certainly, yeah, if you're going for like turn 3s a lot of the time, then, and like you often only have like maybe one creature in play, or like 2 creatures, but you want to find a piece of interaction, then like the body on Spellseeker could definitely be a lot more relevant.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think you really want to. I mean, Space Leaker and Retainers aren't really the same slot in my opinion, but.
Yeah, but we don't have enough. We don't have a ton
in
of
terms
room
of
for a
survival
3
lands,
mana.
of course, they fulfill the same role.
Yeah, so let's talk about some of the upsides of Necromancy. I think the most obvious one is that it enables instant speed plays, which both are strong really late in the game and where you're trying to navigate around interaction, and make a really impactful play on top of somebody else, or in a short window of the game where somebody taps out, or that sort of thing. And importantly, it hits opponents' pieces, which I think becomes more important in Hull Breacher meta.
Yes, and in Dockside metas as well, because Dockside is actually pretty good.
Yeah. Putting Flash Hate Bears into play is actually really powerful, especially in response to wheels and whatnot.
Yeah. I mean, with Necromancy, they don't stick around forever, but.
But sometimes that doesn't matter. If you make everybody dumps their hand,
it absolutely doesn't matter.
You can usually leverage that to win the game.
Yeah.
Well, but before wheels, but also after wheels, right? Like having people, like if you get wheeled and somebody discards like a fat hand or just like a good thing, and then you just are able to draw into a necromancy after the wheel, that's also like a pretty important line of play to have considered.
It's also kind of niche, but having access to other people's docksides makes the eyewitness looping LED line a little bit nicer. And with Necromancy, that wouldn't normally net mana with reanimating an internal witness, reanimating your LED. But if you can use it to reanimate an opponent's dockside, that is mana positive. So that is, some vague consideration.
Nice. So I mean, I think that was a fairly comprehensive discussion on retainers and necromancy in general.
I think both are good. Both are very much playable. Just maybe it's a little meta core, maybe.
Yeah.
You do have to observe how much clunk you're adding to the deck with 3 mana pieces, because while these do have really strong upsides in not being super counterable or being able to make instant speed plays, you can't have everything be too expensive.
Yeah. Well, while Razakats might look like it, or like Razakats in general, especially in Threstamina, might look like a deck that is okay with playing a lot of like fat things and things that cost a lot of mana. It's actually pretty like it's pretty tight on like the big mana things that you can actually play in the deck, and it's a lot more streamlined than you might think.
We're operating at our mana margins for the most part. There's not a lot of room to add additional clunk to the deck.
Yeah, and also like with the way the deck has trended, at least more recently, like reanimate spells already pretty heavily outnumber reanimate targets or ways of getting reanimate targets into the bin. So like oftentimes you're gated on finding something to reanimate, in which case, like, you can put more and more and worse reanimates in your deck until you're blue in the face. But if you need to find like either Razakats or Vilas in a way to pitch it, or like survival or entomb exactly, then like that's the narrower squeeze a lot of the time.
There is some thought to the more wheels that are going on in your meta, the more powerful reanimation density is.
Yeah, that is also
Yes.
a fair consideration.
So speaking of fatties and additional clunk, in the words of Shaper, so one of the things that like I've certainly noticed is there's been a fair amount of flux, and like this is one of the things that's really changed over the lifespan of cats. I'd say is sort of like the non-Razakats reanimation targets that you're playing, because I think originally the deck was on Razakats, Jin-Gitaxias, Sea Sphinx as your sort of like fatty reanimation targets.
And Cataract Leviathan.
And Cataract Leviathan as well, of course.
Specific.
Yes.
It has Cataract Leviathan has a combo with Animate Dead, in which when you reanimate the Cataract Leviathan, it exiles all non-land permanents, and so it exiles its own Animate Dead, returning the Animate Dead to your bounces. Which returns.
I would actually like to say that I'm not going to insert too much of my own experience into this episode, but I would like to say that I did at one point when I was playing Shuffle Hulk combo with somebody else's Cataract Leviathan. With Animate Dead.
Yeah, that is absolutely possible.
Yeah, that is. It's a great feeling. Anyway,
there are some scenarios in which you can go infinite with Thrasios if you set up your deck to do it correctly.
Yes.
By bouncing mana positive items. But that's a little neither here nor there. Cataract was originally in the deck because it was kind of made in response to Bloodpod, which like to dump really hateful permanents in all the time, and them having to return all their stacks to their hand usually just meant you won.
Yeah.
It also has Unearth, which layers with Entomb.
Yes. So sort of at the time of like inception for cats, it sort of I think flexed between possibly 3 to 4 reanimation targets. Sphinx was sort of on the lower end as well, as sort of like something that you could reanimate, but was also very castable with some big mana stuff.
I feel like you need a term for those. Just more jargon to make the discussion more opaque. But like,
just semi-fatties.
Yeah, exactly.
There you go.
Yeah.
But so
historically,
I'd say like cats, it was sort of flexed between 3 to 4 slots. And I'd say each slot was sort of semi-independent in the role that it served, and you sort of tried to get like a good spread of things. Like you want your cat to win the game in the mid game, like Reza to win the game in the mid game. You want your like draw engines to reanimate early when you don't have the creature density, and then like you sort of want like a bailout target like Cataract or something like that. Whereas like nowadays, if you look at Cat's list, they're a lot more streamlined. You'll see like usually only 2, possibly 3. Usually like your Razo will be your hard win line, and then you'll have like 1 alt reanimation target, which is really interesting to me.
Yeah, so for anybody that doesn't know, the alt win con is sort of important because not every board can win with a reanimated Razakats, and you still want to have play in those scenarios when your hand does some kind of reanimation. You want to be able to stick something on the board that will catapult you ahead. Both Tarot and Spleen are only running Vilas in this slot. I run Jin-Gitaxias, and that's kind of been a mainstay of my build, at least for since its inception. What I think Jin offers that some of the others do not is it offers a really quick reanimation line where when you're able to reanimate a Jin on turn 1 or turn 2, it does have the ability to lock out the game in a way that will just let you take it in a way that it's not always obvious that Vilas does that. Because you kind of need a little extra mana to leverage it, or some other means of life loss. So Jin kind of offers that really quick win in a lot of scenarios.
I mean, I just always have Limdul's Vault, so.
Good old 2 mana ad nause.
There's actually no better feeling than searching, like, casting a 2 mana Vamp Tutor plus Adnos. Like, yes, please.
It's pretty good.
So do you guys sort of want to go through, like, sort of talk about, like, compare, first of all, like, the primary targets I think that most people are playing right now, which is Jin and Vilas, and then sort of go through maybe potential alternates and their current place in the meta?
Yeah, sure. I think so. I agree in theory with like Shaper's view that the super early Jins are often better than the Villuses.
I actually really
I
missed
think
that
that
in my meta.
yeah, I think that when if you're reanimating or deathing, I think that Villas is kind of just better. Like drawing 8 cards at sorcery speed, or like when it comes in as opposed to in your end step, is like super relevant a lot of the time. You know, like even just like, oh, I hit a Mox Diamond, I can like cast that now.
Specifically, it means that removal doesn't prevent you from drawing the cards.
Yeah,
Yes.
that and also the fact that you can play some of the cards immediately.
Yeah, doing
are
stuff
both,
like
If
like,
you
very
have the
relevant.
mana, which very early might not necessarily be the case.
Well, or you're playing mana, which is the other like use case. I obviously when you're animate deading or necromancy or loyal retainers or dance of the dead, you don't get to draw the cards immediately. And so then I see the argument that Jin-Gitaxias is better, but like my experience is that I have never in my life untapped with Villas in play and lost.
I have done that a lot of times. I have lost a lot
Well,
of games.
I think Jin would do more before you untap.
Sure.
It threatens a lot more.
But what I'm saying is that like if I'm untapping with it either way, or if it assuming I untap with it, it wins either way, is my experience.
It's not my experience.
Then it actually and that it may just be a consequence of the people I play with, or maybe I've just been lucky.
I actually think the average game length matters a lot for Willis. He's much better later, in my opinion.
But like so you've put Villas into play past the turn, it's gotten back to your turn, and you still haven't been able to get there, like with some level of frequency. Interesting.
Yeah, level of frequency. Usually, when I play Willis, I mean, this is not a game where I untapped with Willis, but it was so frustrating. Right? I turned to reanimated Willis. I had Force of Will ready. I discarded Raza to hand size. I would just win on turn 3. It would have been perfect. The perfect Razakats game. And my opponents just killed me through the Force of Will. It was so sad. But this is not but I didn't untap with Willis there, which is true.
Yeah,
but even if I had untapped with Willis there, I don't think I would have had enough mana to actually win that turn. I mean, no, because the Raza was in the graveyard, so obviously in this very specific scenario, yes. But oftentimes when you play, when you reanimate Willis early, you just don't get there in my experience.
Yeah, I guess
there's also some thought to his creature removal aspect being more or less good depending on your metagame. If you're playing
that's actually pretty decent.
Spell heavy. Yeah, do you want to speak on that? Because you say that your meta is somewhat oriented around Grixis Storm, which doesn't tend to have too many creatures that are.
But high breachers are actually pretty important when people tutor for them and put them in front of like a Jin-Gitaxias or a Consecrated Sphinx. And Willis also has one upside versus these matters where Phantasmal Image, if you keep open a black, you can actually kill the Phantasmal Image when it copies your Willis, and you do not want to see a Grixis Storm deck with a Willis in play.
Yeah, that's casting Adnos with Villas in play does sound pretty good.
I think if we're talking comparatively about Jin and Villas, I think the one of the big things to point out right now is that it looks much better to have a Villas into Hull Breachers, which are a pretty integral part of most metagames, I think, right now. Because you can zap the Hull Breacher and draw your cards anyway, where Jin is still ripping hands away, but it means that you aren't getting your draw, which I think is one of the more important aspects of it.
I think it lines up even better against Notion Thief. Like, it's easier to kill, and it's like much worse. Them having Notion Thief against your Jin is like much worse for you.
Yes.
than them having Hull Breacher, because they still get to gas up to 7 and like make an attempt every turn. But yeah, like again,
there's also been an uptick of RAB and Pyroblast, and that's pretty relevant for Jin.
Yeah, like again, I agree that like if let's say like 20% of the time I was untapping with Villas and losing, then like I would certainly see the argument for Jin.
Well, I think
if that's your experience, I mean, it is also possibly that I just don't generally go for reanimation. Like,
I would evaluate the numbers on the number of times it hits the board and how often that wins, more so than about the untap.
Well, I mean, I guess,
how far it catapults you ahead, I guess, is probably the better metric than whether or not it necessarily wins you the game. Because the play pattern with Jin is often like, you will reanimate Jin, you'll draw 7, it'll nuke one person's hand, the other person will have to blow a tutor to kill it or something.
Yep.
And then you reanimate it again next turn with your drawn 7, and you just continue pushing it through until it connects. Villas can do something pretty similar in terms of threat density, but
sure,
the
reason I'm using that as a metric is because it's something that, like, while not actually playing Jin Gitaxias, I can still evaluate the comparison, because if I don't untap with it, then Jin Gitaxias was not better than Villas in that scenario, is like the way I see it.
I mean, that comes down to the number of cards drawn, probably.
Yeah.
Does it?
I mean, and the amount of things that Villas removed, I would think, is the comparison point, right?
Okay, I guess there's like a very narrow scenario where I would have untapped with Jin, but I didn't with Villas. But I think that those are like pretty rare in my.
People also ignore Villas more. It's probably not worth dwelling on that point, but people. The game very, very, very much warps around Jin, where I think people are a little more comfortable trying to ignore Villas and go for their own proactive lines.
Well, I think the other thing I found with Jin the few times I've played it is that people actually, like, they go like, I can't remove this Jin, so screw it, I'm just gonna go for it. And that is actually like Jin, even if it did draw a few more cards, because essentially you're putting to your opponents that they either have to answer the Jin or attempt their win, you're actually like a little bit more likely to get overwhelmed. Whereas like sometimes people go, okay, I'm just going to hold my interaction, and then like we'll try and stop him on the next turn, and then maybe someone after me will find an answer for the Villas. But like if I'm the first person after someone who just reanimated a Jin and I can't remove it, but I can attempt to win, I'm going to attempt that win, because otherwise I'm just discarding the cards for no value. So, like, I find Jin has a tendency to get overwhelmed, and like I've seen that when other people put it into play a lot.
There is also this sort of edge case I would like to just bring up as like an outsider, where when you reanimate Jin, there's the possibility that like the people earlier in the turn order are the people with interaction, and the people later in the turn order are the people with the win attempts. Where you're sort of now stuck in a situation where, like, let's say nobody at the table can actually remove it, but now you're stripping the interactive player's hands before the like win attempt hand, and now you're sort of like stuck being one of the only people or the only person at the table with interaction for that.
To be fair, they didn't stop you putting Jin into play.
This is also correct.
Yes.
But you are giving them like an untap, right?
You maybe dodged a Flusterstorm by using Animate Dead or something along those lines, for sure.
Or like potentially you did it early enough where they didn't have the mana, but now like they untap and do have the mana, right? Something like that. But anyway, like just again, edge cases here.
I also think, yeah, there's the edge case where you're in a tournament finals and you reanimate Jin, and then there's 700,000 Gilded Drakes. And...
that absolutely happened in one of our previous tournament. We on the Razakats server, Astral Codex has the role of Jin Pong champion.
I was in that
game. I was also in that
game. we
that was in fact how the Into the North podcast got started.
Correct. That tournament game. So actually, I did want to before like I think we got fairly deep into that discussion, and I think we covered most of the relevant points there. I would actually like to discuss a bit more about what you guys think of like what necessitates adding in maybe a third target, what it would take potentially for you to maybe cut a second target altogether in the future for reanimation, or if that's even possible. And then like maybe for third targets, like what the actual options are for third targets if you're looking for like maybe not another draw effect, but something like that. Like something like some alternate effect.
I don't think I'd want to increase my target density much if I wasn't also increasing the ways I have of putting them into the graveyard. Because currently, like, we all play Ghostly Pilfer, which is like the one, it draws cards and is a Tymnet attacker and also lets you discard stuff. But apart from that, mostly things are getting to my bin via Entomb or Survival. So then it doesn't matter as much how many are in the deck. Like, I would much rather even like a worse Entomb be printed than like an Entomb that like only put creatures in the bin. I would snap put that in over like another target. I have sort of toyed in my like Opposition Agent Doomsday scenario. I toyed with like trying to play like 6 or 7 and then a bunch of looting and then actually have like a density based reanimate package where like most, like it's turn 3 or 4, I've drawn a couple extra cards, I've cast a cantrip, so I've seen like maybe 15 cards where like the odds of 15 cards having a reanimate and a target and a way to discard it were actually like decently high. But the Opposition Agent Doomsday scenario did not come to pass, so I think as long as most of the ways of getting things to the graveyard are tutors, it's not super appealing to put in more targets.
I mostly agree. I think that there are some reasons why you'd consider adding maybe one more target that specifically attacked your metagame in some way that let you leverage an advantage. I think that Sphinx is probably my next go-to target, and when you would want that is when you are in a heavily mid-range pod and you want to increase your threat density. I think that's what Sphinx is good at because, as we mentioned before, you can both hardcast the Sphinx and reanimate it, which sometimes gives you two attempts at Sphinx, which is pretty attractive. And you can also play around Grave Hate a little more easily when your fatties are a hair more castable.
If you squint hard enough, your opponent's counterspell is an Entomb.
It's true. It's true.
Not like they can counter creatures anyway, right?
True. Honestly, I think I would be more likely to put Nezahal in that slot. I just love that card.
No, Sphinx is better than Nezahal.
Than Sphinx. I think my hot take is that I guess this is in a meta where like people play counter spells that can actually counter creatures. Which is that like I think Nezahal is actually easier.
Like Nezahal's draw is not a mage trigger, you just feed the Hull Breacher players with that.
I mean, sure. But like I guess in fairness, I haven't really played Nezahal much since Hull Breacher was printed.
I think Nezahal just in general is much weaker effect than Consecrated Sphinx, and it doesn't have the wheel combos, which are important to me. And I'll point out the synergy with Necromancy, because I've had that come up in multiple games in which somebody casts a wheel and you flash in a Sphinx, and it's just all over.
Yeah.
But
I really liked Sphinx better.
I was about to bring that up. you can discard your other fatties with Nezahal.
The fact that Nezahal dodges removal and can't be countered, if I was looking for like a castable fatty, those are like super appealing characteristics for that castable fatty to have.
I just don't think its actual draw rate matches
just not
Sphinx's.
good. Yeah, not by far.
I'm actually not sure that that's true.
That is true.
At least in my experience, because I find people tend not to draw more than one card a turn when there's a Sphinx out, but they definitely tend to do things like
also
interact with each other and play like they just want to play their spells.
In the specific kinds of games that I would be talking about when you want to have increased density would be against really grindy decks, which tend to have more creatures than trying to non-creature storm off. So I think that's also kind of a relevant point in Sphinx's favor, because Nezahal is only drawing on non-creature spells.
Yeah, Nezahal also it does function as like a pseudo stacks piece against certain.
Also, Nezahal has you have no maximum hand size. How are you going to discard your Razakat?
What? Nezahal has an activated ability that costs discarding cards.
True. Yes, true.
So good. Taro, do you have a specific spicy reanimate target that you prefer and for that third slot, or is it just not really a consideration for
Not
your
really,
meta?
no.
Yeah.
I cut down the reanimation targets to 2 slots, and I'm probably not going back because being able to run another card that actually stops the opponents from winning makes much more of a difference than an additional reanimation target probably ever could.
I feel like if your meta is as you've described it, I feel like the actual answer would be Archon of Valor's Reach for you.
Yes, potentially.
Like, just, how about
But
this? No one can cast instants. Okay.
All right.
Good talk.
Yeah, nice rushing river nerd. Not dealing with this one.
I've looked at so many decks and been like, okay, if I play Archon of Valor's Reach, you have to find Gilded Drake and Diabolic Intent. Like, that is your out. Like, that's it.
Yeah, so I mean, like, talking about, like, sort of alternate things, like non-dry things. Obviously, you talked about Cataract earlier in the podcast as well. And sort of going along with Archon of Valor's Reach, I mean, I feel like people have experimented with Razakats in sort of Staxier shells, just because of how resilient it is and how, like, good of a mid-range proposition it is. So we have stuff written here, like, like, sort of alternate semi-reanimates, sort of along the same lines of Sphinx and Archon of Valor's Reach, with stuff like Seedborn Muse and Wandering Archaic. First of all, has anybody here actually tested with those?
I played Seedborn really briefly.
Same.
I haven't tested
That was before my meta got fast, by the way, for context.
I've played Archon of Valor's Reach in, like, a different shell that also played Razakat, but and I guess Nezahal was in my my Muldrotha deck that also played Razakat at the time, so, but not really.
My take on Seedborn Muse was that I think you could alter the deck to be comfortable leveraging it, but I think that it probably requires a few extra slots and a kind of an eye toward playing it mid-rangey and interactively.
Sure.
I couldn't really see myself in the current shell playing it over something like Sphinx.
Yes.
Definitely makes sense.
That's fair.
And actually sort of something else here, because we did get questions about this, and I think a lot of people actually sort of think about this because they think about, like, they think about, like, actual factual reanimation decks and, like, modern legacy, older formats that have things like Grizzlebrand available. And sort of just touching on this because, quote unquote secondary reanimation targets, sort of just like what changes you think would, like, having a Grizzlebrand unban would make to the deck, just because it sort of seems like the obvious slot in that a lot of people go to for, like, a Grizzlebrand unban is just, like, putting it straight into Razakats, where I'm sure none of you think that it's quite that simple, right?
I think Grizzlebrand would definitely go into Razaketh.
Yes.
But I do think that if Grizzlebrand were to unban, firstly, a lot of things would change, and secondly, I'd probably be playing it in a faster shell that contained red.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think there would be a Razakats deck that would probably still exist, that would obviously be on Grizzlebrand, but I think the main Grizzlebrand deck would not be that Razakats deck.
Yeah. Like, it's certainly better than it's better than Jin or Villas, like that.
Yes, by far.
Yeah,
that.
they would both leave the deck probably, and it would just be Razaketh and Grizzlebrand would be my guess.
Yes.
But yeah, I think I agree that we'd have better things to be doing than reanimating Razaketh if Grizzlebrand were unbanned.
Yeah, it avoids that turbo problem that it weighs into the Jin versus Villas argument. It dodges the red blasts, and it probably just wins the game immediately upon resolution. So there's no real need to try to grind value with Villas or stick Jin and try to protect it into discarding your opponent's hands.
Yeah, I remember doing some theory crafting with. It was literally just like my Kess list, and it was like it was not set up to win from nothing, and these were like turn ones, so I have like no lands in play or anything like that. and it was just like it's very difficult to lose after reanimating Grizzlebrand.
Yeah.
Like very, very difficult.
Also, with just like being able to put any number of things that make it insanely good. Like just like putting anything like a like Children of Porlis in the list just immediately makes your chances like skyrocket of actually being able to win. From nothing, from like decks that are going to be built toward it. Anyway, yeah, I think that's a pretty good coverage of that, just so we can get the token Grizzlebrand discussion into our Reanimator episode. Yeah, sort of a couple of other ones. I actually wanted to get to this one since we're just sort of talking about it with things like Archon of Valor's Reach and alternate reanimation targets, which is and this should lead into other stuff later, but also talking about sort of like trying to fit in maybe more stacks into the deck. So potentially things like Archon of Emeria, potentially Deafening Silence. I know that Deafening Silence was a slot in that I was seeing for a bit from some Cats pilots, sort of at the beginning of the Adnos meta, or Breach meta rather. The entire CDH history has been the Adnos meta. And sort of talking about like what would make you guys consider like potentially slotting in more stacks or like slotting in stuff to make it sort of like a Rasa Bears deck rather than current Razakats.
So I would think that if I played in a meta like Tarot, I would be more inclined to search for bears that, you know, hated out the entire field that I was playing against. If you can't depend on your other players to kind of exert interactive force, then it's kind of on you to do that if you want to play Razaketh. So I feel like that would push me in that direction. And I think Tarot did that somewhat in adding Lavinia, yes. And yeah. So I think that, you know, if I were in Tarot's shoes and I was struggling with, you know, early win attempts or whatnot, I would consider adding some of these pieces.
Yeah, they've been working very well to combat that specific meta. But honestly, I've tried some others as well, especially Rule of Law hate bears for Razakats, and I did not like them that much because while it's easy for us to sack them to Rasa and then win through them, we have a lot of setup to do in this deck, and they kind of got in the way.
Yeah, and also not being able to, like, if your meta is very counterspell focused as opposed to like removal focused, not being able to protect your reanimation spell is also like a pretty big downside.
Yes, that as well.
Trying to do it that way.
Great. Talk about bears. I think we can also have a quick discussion on sort of like what makes you want to play things like Faber Elder, Bloom Tender, like sort of big mana stuff, potentially Priestess of Titania, that kind of stuff. Because we've sort of seen it be like it's sort of a staple package in historical Razakats, but I mean we've seen some people cutting it. I know Taro is.
I think I'm the only one who actually cut them. I think everyone else is playing them. I don't think I've seen another list that doesn't run at least Bloom Tender.
Yeah, so what I think those cards offer to the deck is the ability to hardcast your fatties for one, and secondly, grind a lot of value just with the sheer amount of mana that they produce. And Fabro also attacks with Tymna, which is super relevant. So they're strongest in the part of the game where you've been able to develop both of your commanders and you have the full tapping for 4 going. And each of those equates to a Thrasios activation or, you know, multiple spells being cast. So they really boost your power in the late game, and they help you kind of develop that in the mid game. But if your meta is really early game focused, it does make sense to forgo them because you're not trying to amplify your late game strength. You're trying to get there essentially.
Yeah, there was actually a time when I didn't dare cut Bloom Tender because it was such a staple, and I actually cut
Bloom Tender is so good though.
1 mana dog, and to keep Bloom Tender in. And when I made that choice, whenever I drew Bloom Tender, I just thought to myself, I can't play this. I don't have the time to even get mana from this. And I think the cards are very good. And if the meta you're playing in is slow, you should play at least Bloom Tender and probably Fabro as well if your meta is slow enough. But if you're playing in a fast meta, I think these are some of the first cards that should be cut to make room for more interaction. and more hate bears.
Yeah, I certainly see the argument that if you're not consistently casting both of your commanders, then particularly Faber Elder, I think its value case is like much more dependent on having both of your commanders.
Yes.
But yeah, I certainly see like if you're just trying to zoom, then then they might not be ideal.
Fair. All right, so talking about mana, we also have some stuff here about mana base tweaking. Obviously, hot topic amongst any deck community. But also having played some Thrastimna myself, I can tell that there's definitely going to be a lot of argument about, especially playing like what lands you're playing in a deck like Razakats, where first of all, just being on Thrastimna alone and sort of wanting to have both your commanders in play a lot of the time, it obviously puts a lot of like base pressure on your mana base and how you build it to be able to like have all your colors in the right places all the time. But also at like being able to cast all of your 4-color spells, I'd say it's a lot more like your colors are a lot more evenly distributed in something like Razakats than it would be in like 4 or 5-color Stormlists where you're just like super black and red focused. And everything else is sort of going by the wayside. Whereas in Cats, I feel like it's a lot more balanced, and like you want green early to cast Dorks, but you also want black to do your combo plays, but you want blue for your protection, and you want like all this white. You want like at least one white every game to cast Timna, and then potentially do some utility stuff. So, sort of get your opinions on how to build a mana base and sort of the hot topic, hot button issues currently.
I've definitely been like surprisingly okay keeping hands that can't cast Timna. Like I would say that the deck is like a Sultai deck most of the time. So like my experience there is like it's higher than like some lists in terms of like how many colors you need, but it's certainly not nothing close to an even distribution. And I played 2 basics, which is like almost certainly wrong. It's kind of just historical and a little bit of a nod to my meta where there's an unreasonable amount of back to basics.
Nice.
And like feeling like I don't have to remove the back to basics if I can get one or both basics and some dorks is like a nice feeling. But then like yeah, so I think probably playing 2 basics is wrong.
I find it interesting that you choose a forest and an island, because normally if I went down to 2 basics in this deck, it would be a forest and a swamp.
I just need like it for me. Those games tend to be about me trying to present as much interaction as I possibly can. So, Island is definitely better.
Yeah, I find that interesting for a back to basics meta, because usually that implies like the presence of like mono blue decks or things along those lines. Where my take would be I just want to present as many threats as possible.
Do you think that might be
just try
like a difference though in how you might build a basic suite for like Blood Moon versus back to basics? Because while they exert similar pressures on your mana base, like maybe the outcomes of that might be different. Where you might want Golgari basics for a Blood Moon so that like nobody else can interact either, so you might as well just jam. Versus like a back to basics where it sort of implies that there's more blue at the table, so like you might not just be able to jam through all the blue that's left over.
Well, yeah, the idea there is that if other people are exerting a lot of interactive force, I don't care to interact. I would rather greed on developing my draw engines or trying to stick a fatty or whatever it is.
I find often in those games like the games where that line of play is relevant, which is like why the card is in my deck. It's to the point where like you have to interact with things that aren't directly win cons. So like yes, theoretically there's I don't need to present interactions so that I can stop someone from winning the game. I need to present interactions so that I can stop them from like resolving a Ristic Study or like I don't know what the recurring insight or like things like that. So like the game turns into like it's actually about stopping other people from getting resources, and not just stopping them from winning the game, which is obviously like a very specific meta.
Yeah, my build currently only has a forest. I feel like there's this kind of lesser emphasis on back to basics in Blood Moon now that Dockside is a thing. So for a blind meta, I think it makes sense to run 0 basics or maybe just a forest. It's really I really think that a lot of this mana based talk is points of preference and
Yeah, I
eking
think so.
out like very small margins in your castability of things and whatnot. And I think you can. I think a lot of these decisions are defensible regardless of what you choose.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm definitely inclined to agree.
So that being said,
Um,
do you think that there are any decisions that are indefensible in Cats for mana-based discussion?
I mean, I personally couldn't ever see myself cutting Gemstone Caverns, which Spleenface did for his build.
Same.
Um,
Same.
I just think that the fast mana is really strong, and I probably wouldn't give it up.
I honestly, the thing that I find like a little bit weirder is the Forbidden Orchard. Like I see a lot of tables where there's no one that where I can just give them 1/1s. Like either they're the person I'm trying to connect with my Tymna attacks, or they have their own use for the creatures. And
I have the most shit-eating grin on my face. I leveraged Orchard very politically, and I find that I often can turn giving out 1/1s into a resource in a lot of ways. I feel like it can be powerful against Najila and Tymna specifically. And I've had maybe less experienced players run into my Forbidden Orchard, more times than I can count. I feel like and I feel like just globally, I want all of my skills to be as castable as possible. So you might find my builds running more of the worst rainbow lands, just so I can ensure that my hand does what it needs to do.
Yeah, I actually agree with
Where's
that.
the Gemstone Mine?
Not the most unreasonable thing. I think Gemstone Mine doesn't make Razakats because you kind of do intend to grind, and it looks a little worse in those kind of scenarios when you do have to eventually sack it. But
Yeah.
I honestly don't think it's that far off the table that I wouldn't consider it. To be really honest,
In Razakats, wow.
I just think in general you can leverage 5-color lands pretty well. But I'm obviously not going to play Gemstone Mine, but I do think it's not that far out of the realm of consideration. I know that's a super spicy take, but
Awesome. All right, cool. So we have a couple more as SCD here. I think one that has recently come up that I think a lot of decks have sort of been in flux with this is sort of like figuring out a place for Culling Ritual and figuring out if it has a place. I know certainly in some stuff in my experience, like some Hulk decks have sort of been iffy on Culling Ritual, so I'm interested to see like sort of what the discussion has been like around it for Cats.
So the obvious thing is that it kills all your bodies. So Culling Ritual into Razakats doesn't actually do what you want it to do, sadly.
Exactly.
That being said, I think Culling Ritual is an amazing card, and decks should definitely be experimenting with it, and it might even enable, some archetype shifts if you're intelligent about how you leverage it.
Yeah, it's like a card that I want to play.
But you don't.
But I don't necessarily want to play it in Cats.
I just don't think it's the right deck for the card. Because the thing we want to hardcast with a lot of mana is Razakats, and if we kill our dogs, it's just not as good. But the card itself is actually great, I think. There will be a deck that really makes use of it at some point.
Villas with it, because you kill all the little things that you could be drawing off of.
Yeah,
you can always point Villas at itself and stuff. But
I was actually just about to ask, like, do you think that you would like Culling Ritual better if that you had like 2 decent like green or black reanimation targets? Like, say, like if like Sea Sphinx was green or black. And if you like
that might make it
one more, like,
a bit more attractive.
Yeah, would you like think about playing Culling Ritual more in that case? Like I guess
if I could play Grizzlebrand, yes, I would.
I guess what I was asking is what do you think the case in the future is that makes you reconsider culling ritual for cats? Like, is it just the reanimation?
I'm just waiting for the RC to unban Grizzlebrand.
Okay.
I'm still sitting here waiting.
I've been waiting a very long time.
I know.
Shaper sitting in the corner as a skeleton, waiting for Grizzlebrand.
The other aspect is that it doesn't play Oracle combo, and it doesn't make the white symbols that you'd need for Auriok. So it just has a bunch of points that make it not quite optimal for this shell. But I do think that Thrasios Tymna should definitely consider how it can leverage culling ritual going forward.
Great.
Are you suggesting that 2 Thrasios activations is not good enough?
Hey, it might be with a board wipe. You never know.
So actually, I wanted to sort of hop out of this and hop into another one. So we have an internal structure here for show notes. We skipped over a thing earlier, but I think this is a good time to get back to it. In sort of talking about build direction and talking about cats variants, we don't want to go through the entire show, sort of only talking about like Thrasios Tymna cats. Obviously, that's the main build that we'll be talking about because that's what most cats pilots play. And it's sort of like the accepted default, I think. Especially since I think a lot of the time that you stray away from that, it sort of tends into hybridization rather than like true variants. But I think we definitely want to talk about some like cats variants and like what else you can do with the shell, maybe like different colors, different commanders, that kind of stuff. And I think the first on our list here is sort of like going down a color into 3-color cats and sort of like seeing what that offers, right?
Yeah, so there's a few different directions you can take that. I know people have experimented with like a Thrasios Tevesh type list, and so you could theoretically do polymorph stuff, though I think that's better with Tyrant, but also just like playing like the use case of if you believe Tevesh is better than Tymna and white cards, then like you certainly could do that. I don't think any of the white cards in cats are like what I would describe as critical. But like Enlightened Tutor, this is a deck that leverages it very well. You lose Noble Hierarch. That's like in so many decks, that's the white card I'm saddest to lose.
I mean, losing Silence is also fairly big, right? Obviously, Veil of Summer is a decent replacement, but Silence is sort of what helps you lock out the game when you're activating LED during your combo line.
Yeah.
You also
you lose the Salvagers.
Yeah, you do.
You lose a bunch of the good hate bears that let me survive.
But yeah, like they're if
Magistrate.
Tevesh is yeah. Like there's a bunch of very good cards that you can't play. But like it's not like it kills any of the combos. I also think that like Smothering Tithe is a very quietly powerful card in this list. But
yeah.
And just to be, I think just like before we go further, this also applies to like any other like Sans White stuff, not just Tevesh, Thras, but also like Sans White and that kind of stuff. But yeah, for anyway, continue on.
Yeah, like you definitely lose some white cards, but like going to 3 color as opposed to like going to Sans White, like actual Sans White, like with Thrasios Vile Smasher, where you gain the red cards as a payoff. I have a hard time convincing myself that Tevesh is better than Thrasios, like point blank, and I have a much harder time convincing myself that Tevesh is better than, not Thrasios. Tevesh is better than Tymna, and all the white cards you get to play in this list,
and potentially like the 5-color commanders as well, right? Like you have to compare it against like going up colors instead of going down colors.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think the going up colors is honestly less about like, or like the downside of going up colors is less about the colors you. I mean, obviously, you don't lose colors, but it's like that. I think that's
you lose
like
some utility in the command zone is the main thing.
Yeah, it's the utility in the command zone that's like the big issue in 5-color.
Yes.
Yeah. Then there's also
sorry.
I guess if you have something to say about Sultai, then we'll do that before we move on to
No, I was gonna go on 5-color.
Oh, okay, yeah. And then the other sort of direction that people have gone is the Abzan lists. It used to be either, I know like Noobs always had his Anafenza list that then became like it's Timna something now, usually often Kodama, which is like actually provides a decent amount of utility. It synergizes very well with like rule of laws that you want to be playing in that sort of like Abzan Hate Bear stacks shell, because it makes it surprisingly plausible to Razaketh your way through rule of law, like having Kodama in the command zone, and you can play lines where like you cheat out something like an Animate Dead rather than casting it to protect it from being countered. But I mean, obviously, like if I started listing all the blue cards you can't play,
we'd be here for a
Yikes.
long time.
yeah. You can't play Oracle. Also, all
Big
of the
one.
counter spells.
Yeah.
So it's definitely like a much like different deck, I think.
Yeah.
Like and which is why you would build it as like a very dedicated like Razabears type strategy rather than
Yeah, you'd have to.
So actually, speaking about
Whereas-
Razabears, then, what do you guys think about, like, instead of like losing a color and playing Razabears, what about like staying in Sans Red and then still playing Razabears? Like, what's the merit, do you think? Is there like a meta that you would consider it more for?
I think that the list can support like it's not like with something like CST, for example. I think if you put in like 3 or 4 bears, you've made a more fundamental change than you have with Razakats. And
For sure.
so at that point you're like, okay, well, if I'm gonna play 3 or 4, then like I might as well play like 8 and play like a totally different deck. Whereas like because Razaketh can so easily support like the best ones, it's like hard to convince myself that like I really want to play not the best ones. Like change my archetype. You know,
I think I think it can become attractive if you have a certain angle in which you can hate your meta. If, for example, you want to play additional null rods, I think you can, pretty drastically alter your win cons in order to support the kind of bears that you pick. And you can play a more heavily interactive strategy that still wins with Razaketh and just have your win cons adjust to be sensitive to it. I think there's a lot of room to do that with the Razaketh shell, that like you might end up with something more akin to Razabears if you're the only one exerting a lot of interactive influence, but you still think that your meta is inbred enough that you can hit it out on that specific angle.
I guess I could also see I have a version that I workshopped a few months ago that like basically the idea was I like never wanted to present people with something that they wanted to counter. So to that end, I was playing I was playing Fiend Artisan, and then like a whole bunch of different creatures that like answered various different problems. So like that's sort of another direction you could take like I trimmed a lot of the interaction, and then was playing like a much more hate bear centric strategy and like ways of like just trying to have as much consistent access to the creatures as I could. Like I even toyed with like Yasan, for example.
The other upside of bears we've talked about a little bit before is that a lot of the greedier decks are forgoing creature counters, so you can land bears without being able to be interacted with. And so if there are a lot of bears that are attractive to develop in your meta and give you good shots at winning, increasing the density of it increases the amount of hands you can keep and blah blah blah. So I think there are reasons that you might put more hate bears in.
Yeah, it feels like Cats as it exists kind of gets to play the best of both worlds in that like you can play a lot of the very good bears without having to make the changes.
Right.
So then in order to like if you're going to justify making the changes, instead of adding the best bears to your deck, you're adding the less good bears to your deck because you're already playing the best bears.
Right. So how about in that case, instead of swapping strategies, we look at swapping colors, right? I think the big one that has seen like a fair amount of development, historically anyway, has been like Sans White Bear or Sans White Cats. There we go, got it, nailed it. Which we already talked about what you lose going down to like Sultai. But red, especially recently, does offer a fair amount of like other toys to play with, right? And sort of pushes the archetype, I'd say, in a different direction. Have you guys tested with this a bit recently?
I have. I've actually been doing a lot of development in Sans White, and I'm a big fan of the direction that it takes you. It gives you a lot of very quick lines. I think Dockside into Razakats is, disgusting. Doesn't even really approach, but there's a lot of really good things that it offers your Razakats lines when you're able to layer the LED with Breach specifically and leverage Dockside in your Eyewitness lines. I think you can play it as either Thrasius Vile Smasher or Ikra Crom Rehan. I think there's merit in all three of those combinations. And I definitely think that it should be more deeply explored.
For sure.
So I was actually interested about talking about this because I feel like it's sort of a direction for the deck that might be appealing to Taro for his meta. And I was sort of wondering if you would.
Well, I have a 5-color version.
I see.
Which works pretty well, but honestly, I almost think that the 4-color version does slightly better in my meta because I have more room for things that can slow things down, while in the 5-color version, I just go way more all in on the threat density, and you still can't raise the super fast North decks, even with 5 colors.
Right.
At least not reliably.
Yeah, I will say I do also very much like in when you're playing red, like the idea of playing World Gorger Dragon as a second reanimate target, because that like
has been
obviously it
quite
doesn't
good
work with Death and Reanimate themselves, but with Animate Dead, Necromancy, and Dance of the Dead, it like is probably the best at solving the I don't have the resources for a Razakats line reanimate dilemma, because you need a land that doesn't hurt, which is like pretty easy to get for just an easy
Oh, don't forget there's one other piece you need.
you need another creature in a graveyard.
You do. I actually caused a draw in a tournament setting in a game that I was like surely going to lose if I didn't draw it by Noxious Revivaling the only other creature that was in the graveyard. So you have to make sure before you start your World Gorger loop that there is another target available to stop the loop, or you have to have Kenrith out.
Yeah. Or, something like Golos, whatever. It is actually interesting though, right? Because like World Gorger solves that problem while also being like just bad enough that you still have to play Razakats, which is sort of funny because it means that like it's bad enough as a secondary thing that you're still actually playing cats while still being like a great secondary backup.
Yeah, I think they offer really opposite things, right? Like Razakats offers you incredible late game resiliency. It's very uninteractable once Razakats hits the board, but its downside is that it costs some additional resources. Where World Gorger Dragon is extremely interactable. You have to be very careful about when you leverage it, but it's extremely mana efficient at the same time, and you don't really actually need all that much to have it pop off. So it kind of gives you two different angles, and I think that's kind of a cool pairing.
Yeah. So sort of talking about that, I think we can sort of lump in 5-color cats with like what a lot of people think like Sans White cat sort of looks like. I think I think they have a lot of similar qualities, right? You're
for sure.
Yeah, you obviously you don't lose white, so you get to keep a lot of your the white like power cards, but I think I would say from looking from the outside that 5-color cats sort of bears a strong resemblance to Sans White cats in the fact that you have a lot of faster lines. You're sort of layering a bit more with obviously Dockside, Breach, usually playing World Gorger. But yeah, you do get to just like keep stuff like E-Tutor, Silence, Strandeth, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I think like the big other outlier here is Sans Blue Cats, which is like I again looking from the outside, I would say is like almost not a cat stack just from how different it is on a fundamental level.
I feel like it ends up being more like a Raza Bears, like we were discussing, because that's your kind of your method of interaction is to play Hate Bears, and you still are kind of slow in the same way that Razakats in general is like somewhat slow on occasion, but you do have to survive the early game.
Yeah, I think it can also occasionally become like also not a cat deck in that it's it's more of just like an all-in turbo deck, like particularly with like the Jund commanders, either Rograk or Dargo can play like a turbo Razakats type strategy.
Would you say that's more because of the lack of blue, or because of the lack of like a second good value commander though? Like because obviously regular Cats has like 2 really solid value engines in the command zone. And would you say that, like, when you go over to Sans Blue, you're now stuck with like either Tana, or you're stuck with some like weird set of commanders that don't really provide you direct value? So do you think those decks would get less turbo-y if you had a second like good value commander in the command zone, or do you think it's more of a function of not having the interaction to interact with the table consistently?
I mean, I think it's certainly like both of those factors play a part.
Yeah.
Like I think that that it's hard to play mid-range not in blue, because it's very easy to just die. So like I don't know that that alone would be enough. Like getting the value engine commander alone would be enough, but also like there's a reason you don't see like Najila Cats. It's not because you can't play blue cards.
Right.
I think there is actually a Najila Cats version floating around somewhere.
Yeah,
I didn't say it doesn't exist. I said you don't see it. Those are two.
Okay, yeah, that's true. That's true.
Pongo actually put together a very nice looking Najila Cats build that you can find if you know how to look for that.
Yeah, that must be the one that I've seen.
Great. So
I know how to look for that.
I think that's a lot of the alt like builds that you might see floating around. And I think you guys sort of wanted to get into also maybe just a quick discussion on sort of alt win conditions, or like layered win conditions as well. Because historically Razakats has sort of been like a semi-layered deck. We're not getting into a discussion of what layered means, but but it's historically the shell has sort of it's held, or like it sort of contained multiple combos in the same list. Obviously Orgak Salvagers historically lead in Relic Warder, Razakats stuff like value reanimation. There's a fair amount going on to be doing. So I think like it's reasonable to talk about sort of like other alternatives and what's been tested, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
So let's talk about, first of all, like I guess sort of the dead one. We've already talked about Bomberman fairly in depth, but like the dead one here that we seem to not really see that much anymore, which is lean in Relic Warder.
It offers good lines into Rule of Law specifically, because you can develop your Blood Artist, and then you can sit around and wait for an opportunity to reanimate the cat and just go off. The deck as it stands now struggles a little bit underneath the Rule of Law. But you have lots of ways to outgrind it and figure out how to remove it and do your combo.
And I mean, the reason why Lean in Relic Warder, to be explicit, sort of quote unquote died is because of Thoracle, right? And
yes.
So
Yeah, it was replaced with just a simple Thoracle line because it was really efficient to be able to play the Thoracle, sacrifice it to find the Demonic Consultation plate into the trigger. It's just very simple. It's very easy. You just didn't really need the density of the Leon Relic Warder anymore.
Fair.
Yeah.
So at the beginning, the people really wanted to hang on to the Leonin Relic Warder.
Yeah, I just remember.
I feel like I feel like that was me. I feel like that was me refusing to update the build. Even though,
yeah, probably.
It was you and Wedge. I joined the server. I was like, "Why aren't you just playing Consult?" And it was like, you can remove hate pieces with Leon and Relic Warder.
No, I don't think we were actively trying to defend that it wasn't more optimal with Oracle. It just took me a while to decide that was the path the deck should take. And
yeah, you didn't, but there were people that did.
I
There were
specifically
people that
remember
did.
someone mentioning the utility of Leon and Relic Warder, and then like literally a little bit later being like, "Yeah, no, that was just like."
So there's some discussion about the niche of a deck right? Where
Yeah.
you have to consider what you're actually like trying to combat with the style of deck that you're taking to a table. And historically, this to me at least in its development was kind of a response to a like Staxy control meta, which was not the meta of the time. That when this happened, we were in Hulk Winter, but basically getting rid of your only line against Rule of Law, besides just out grinding it, didn't immediately appear like the direction the deck wanted to take if you're trying to sit it in that niche. So there was some consideration to keeping it for that specific reason. And I still think if you're taking Razakats to like an incredibly stacksy meta and you expect to see Rule of Law every game, you should shift your win cons around such that you have lines against Rule of Law.
I think then you should play 5-color.
But obviously, Oracle is Oracle, and we play it now.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, actually, sort of talking a bit more about when this deck was created. I know that there was actually some effort in the past to hybridize it with what it was trying to combat at the time, which is Isorev. Well, Paradox Engine stuff, but Isorev specifically. And I think there are still deck lists floating around trying to like fit these into the same shell. Do we have opinions on that?
On
Isorev.
On Isorev specifically, yeah.
I honestly
I
have
think
to
that,
say I
like-
have never seen that done by anyone.
Isn't that a lurker meme? It's a lurker meme, isn't it?
Yeah, there's definitely a lurker build with Isorev.
Okay.
Ad nauseam.
I think that you want to play more mana rocks with Isorev, and I don't think that this is a deck that leverages them particularly well.
Yeah.
So I think there's some tension there, but obviously, like, if you look at a lot of turn 3 board states, like, it's certainly not difficult to imagine making a couple changes to the deck that would make your Scepter online pretty consistently. But
I think it might be something that a Sans White build might do a little bit better with.
yeah, I could definitely see that.
Maybe.
Thrasher's File Smasher. Because you lose the Auriok Salvagers combo, so if you do want some extra redundancy, you could take it in that direction if you wanted to. I don't know. I couldn't really see myself being a huge fan of this layering. Pretty much any way you cut it.
Fair.
The pieces that it wants are kind of disparate, and it just doesn't quite fit.
So another one we have here is actually Breach. I know we talked about this a bit earlier, but obviously, layering with LED is a nice upside here.
Big fan.
Yeah, it's great. If you have red in
Yeah.
your Razakats deck, it should be in there.
Yeah. So I mean, those are the big ones. Obviously, there's some other stuff. There's been all manner of attempted layering things in the past. Hermit Druid, Hulk, other random things. I think like Free from the Real, Intruder Alarm stuff has been attempted. Is there anything that stands out to you guys as things that you'd like to see maybe experimented with more, or you think maybe time for a revisit?
Breach in general, I think
Yes.
Sans White has a lot of room to explore the layering with Breach, and there's a lot of really attractive facets to it that keep your card quality really high while also enabling all of these different pieces.
So Hermit Druid is like kind of an interesting one for me, and not in the sense that we normally see Hermit Druid, in that it's like, I'm gonna play this like turbo Hermit Druid as fast as possible, Hermit Druid turn 2, turn 3 type idea, but actually more in the I want to win through stacks capacity, and try and control yourself, but like, the idea of just manually either casting the Oracle or cheating it in off something like an Aether Vial.
Oh, yes.
And then,
yeah, talk to me more.
And so like just like you could actually play Rule of Laws, and then have Hermit Druid as like a quasi 2-card combo, and like basically you would just, like, in terms of actually enabling the Hermit Druid, you would just cut basics and then play Hermit Druid. Like, you wouldn't go into like a whole like super deep on like a Dread Return, Memory's Journey, like all of that stuff. Maybe you could just play like exactly Dread Return.
I just try.
And
to
also,
like
you're already playing a whole bunch of reanimates, so you can kind of have it be like
redundant,
a 2-card combo of like Hermit Druid plus a reanimate spell.
Interesting. Taro, have you experimented with anything wacky, or you think anything else should?
I don't really experiment with the additional win cons. I think my experimentation is more about the experimental things that make me survive.
Gotcha. Makes
but
sense.
of course, in my 5-color list, Breach has been really amazing, and I guess I'm the only one out of us here who does the intuition thing with Luris and Bomberman, which I guess is a win con, but we talked about that already.
So,
Breach is a good card. Hot takes only on the Into the Dark
Yes,
podcast.
only hot takes.
Good stuff. All right. So I think we've actually gotten through the bulk of our single card and like actually talking about the physical deck itself, which is pretty neat. So I sort of wanted to get more into discussions around piloting. I know we've talked a bit about like card choices that you can make to play around hate, or like what kind of sort of play patterns you prefer with different card selection choices. But I think it's time to get really more into the nitty gritty of like what those play patterns actually look like and the actual method in which you play around certain hate, maybe like external to those card choices in the first place. So I think getting to the first one is playing around hate. Obviously, again, we've been saying the deck's fairly resilient, and although like you might be able to point out certain like singleton hate pieces that mess with the deck, I think that there's definitely paths around most like single pieces and sometimes even pairs of effects that might usually stop you. So you want to start with potentially Rule of Law somebody?
So I mean, Rule of Law is one that you generally can't actually like win through cleanly. So you're looking to set yourself up with some way to get your big fatty into play. And then like just untap and then remove the Rule of Law. There are like you have a little bit more leeway through something like a Deafening Silence if you are either using something like Loyal Retainers or just hard casting if the game goes long enough to try and remove it and win same turn. But this is one that the deck, as most of us have it built, unless you count Breacher Twister naturally as just a win, can't actually win through. But it's honestly like pretty nice to just, if you're like drawing cards off Tymna, drawing cards off Thrasios, and like maximum each opponent can present one threat each turn, it's a piece that you're often just happy to let stick around until you're ready to get rid of it. Like you don't have to. It doesn't stop you from playing the game. It just stops you and getting yourself ahead. It just stops you from like actually winning.
We talk about Rule of Law as Rule of Law, but I tend to see it more as the creature versions of Rule of Law because they tend to grind Tymna value,
especially with the new Archon right?
alongside it. Yeah, so most commonly I think you see Archon and you see Ethersworn Canonist because it's a mana cheaper than the alternatives. So in those cases, I think it's really attractive to try to get a Villas on the board because it both it lets you zap it and grind value at the same time. So you have a lot of control on how you take the game from that. In general, when you're in a Rule of Law standoff, you kind of have to guess at how much interaction people have because it's really difficult to like throw a counter spell at something, and everybody's holding up one counter spell, so you don't tend to be able to just pop the Rule of Law and go off. So it becomes like kind of a delicate balance of spending your turn trying to grind value to get ahead of everybody else, and then once you are there, you tend to want to throw things at the table and force them to kind of start whittling away at the interaction that they have in their hand. So like developing a breacher and then like slamming a wheel that is not going to resolve, so people are forced to kind of expend their hand answering what you're doing while you're still grinding value with Tymna and still Tymna every turn, for example. So you do eventually have to try to create a window in which you can remove the Rule of Law and win in a lot of cases.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Do you guys have any like preferences on like cards that you're looking for under a rule of law that might like change in priority versus not playing with a rule of law in play. Obviously removal, but things like would you prioritize getting a survival of the fittest over like other lines under rule of law or like something like that?
Survival's an amazing one.
Yeah,
Yeah,
probably.
definitely.
I'd
also just be like pretty happy to have any of my sort of like bigger engines. So Faber Elder or like Smothering Tithe are both cards that like I'm really happy to see, especially because rule of law games tend to not end super quickly. So like not only do I think they play like decently well with like the way things tend to play out under rule of law, but also just like the longer you expect to have them in play, the better it gets.
Right.
Yeah, I'll also point to the ability to shut off your opponent's grind engines. I think is really powerful once there's a rule of law in play. So specifically, Dranith and Hull Breacher, I think are really attractive to try to get onto the board. Both of those are really good when you have a survival of the fittest in play. Specifically, Opposition Agent and Hull Breacher can kind of come down at instant speed once you have a survival. So it gives you a lot of flexibility on what you can deploy. Obviously, people shouldn't be letting you have a survival underneath a rule of law, but sometimes I don't know that, so
they shouldn't be letting you have a survival not
Period.
under rule of law either.
just in general, I guess.
Yeah, but I guess the thing with cats is that the player base is still kind of small, so not everyone knows how to properly play against it sometimes.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can't afford to stop
that's
the
true as
Razakats player too much. So like there are just other decks that are doing like way more immediately threatening things.
Of course, yeah.
You know, developing like really powerful grind engines. So you say, well, I guess I have to ignore that. Hopefully, I can win quickly, and then
like they're casting
then you
a
get
survival, and like this person is representing Nas on their turn, and they just tutored. Like, yeah, I have to pick my poison, and
I mean,
guess
people
I'm
still
picking
counter
survival.
my survivals in my meta, even though there are noses everywhere. So.
I mean, sounds like they're just tired of you winning all the time from the way you tell it.
Yeah, they might be.
So another one here that's actually sort of like it might seem superficially similar to rule of law, but I think has a lot deeper implications on how you actually need to play the game after it lands on the table is Curse Totem or Curse Totem effects, Linvala, Curse Totem, that kind of thing. Where like it sort of stops your win as well, in sort of a soft sense, but I feel like it sort of impacts your overall game plan a lot harder than rule of law, right?
Yeah, and also if you're only running villas as a secondary target, that also presents some roughness because if you're running like Jin or Sea Sphinx, they become like really attractive underneath a Curse Totem because it doesn't really stop their triggers. But
I mean, Villas definitely still draws cards under.
For sure, but not really at the same rate, right?
Yeah, it slows it down. Unless
it's a less obviously good plan. Like I don't know if you're sitting there underneath a Curse Totem saying like, oh, all I need to do is reanimate a Villas here, you know. But underneath Curse Totem, I think that you're trying to focus in on your Timna plan and your ability to develop your other draw engines.
Yeah. Sure. I obviously
or just going for a raw console win is also an option. Same with Hull Breacher and a wheel.
Yes.
Or Notion Thief and a wheel. All of those become really attractive. But it does shut off your Auriok Salvager plans, so that ceases to be an option.
It also sort of makes your creatures in general less valuable. Like you're not going for Faber Elder anymore. You're not going for Bloom Tender.
Yeah,
anymore.
it also attacks your mana, so your mana will be light throughout this process. It's definitely one that you don't want to see, and
but it's not particularly common, I think, even in blind metas nowadays.
Yeah, I think we've seen a decline in Curse Totem since Hulk's banning or Flash's banning.
It's boomer tech.
Yeah,
I don't know about all that. I think Curse Totem is kind of underappreciated.
Speaking of boomer tech,
I know. Oh no.
Graveyard hate, huh? the stuff that nobody plays anymore. You don't have to
for some unknown reason, but
I
think specifically here we're thinking about Cage and Rest in Peace.
Yeah, those are the big ones
for the most part.
Potentially, we could also be talking about like trying to play through a Deathrite Shaman, which obviously, while annoying, it isn't crippling to the same extent that like persistent Grave Hate can be, but So actually, I would say, is there like, first of all, let's talk about persistent grave hate, because obviously that's something that you're more likely to see, or like is more likely to be an issue. But I will touch on another subject after this one. So like, what do your play patterns look like under grave hate, like Rest in Peace or Curse Totem?
You're just looking to grind really hard, really. Like once you reach the mana thresholds where you can cast your big fatties, you just don't even worry about it anymore. I think Bloom Tender and Fabro Elder and Smothering Tithe all kind of serve an important role here in getting you over those mana thresholds where you can just kind of slam your Razakats or whatever and say, nice rest in peace, bud.
Yeah, I think it's also like decently easy to just like like you can either try and grind into slamming like hard casting Razakats, but you can also just try and grind into just assembling Oracle Console like, manually.
Yeah, pretty much.
Is like you're still playing like you know,
A reasonably efficient Thrust Hymn to Consult deck.
Thrasios
Yeah.
to the mid-range consult deck.
And even stuff like Breacher or Notion Thief with a wheel.
Yeah.
Fair.
Yeah. I think a lot of these stacks pieces are answered by routing through your alternate win cons.
Yeah, reasonable.
Exactly.
Because they are very hard to stop in most scenarios. Rule of Law does it, but not much else does.
So, having said that about like permanent graveyard hate, is there any like major differences in how you function around like graveyard hate, like Rest in Peace or Cage, versus how you would function around stuff like specifically like Deathrite Shaman, but also things like like Spell Bomb or Relic of Progenitus, or what's the other one? The Lantern, I think that people are playing now in some decks.
Soul
Yeah,
Guide
Soul
Lantern.
Guide Lantern. It's the
Well,
one.
so you can if you have excess resources, you can do fake out plays where you pretend you're trying to get something out of the graveyard, and then they blow their piece, and you do something else. But those tend to take a lot of resources. I think in general, if there's grave hate in play, you're kind of just underneath it for the most part.
Yeah, but
Deathrite Shaman you can fake out in a lot of ways, but
Yeah.
I think I'd almost rather see something like a hard piece of grave hate, because I think that like Deathrite Shaman is like the delta between how good the grave hate is against you versus how good it is against your opponents is like much higher on something like Deathrite
Breach
Shaman,
deck.
where like Deathrite Shaman is like annoying against Breach, but like you can definitely breach through a Deathrite Shaman, whereas like we can't, or like we need like one of some small set of pieces to actually like get through a Deathrite Shaman. I mean, obviously, like you can just kill it, but
So actually, talking on that point though, is the soft grave hate, especially in the current meta, something you're more willing to preemptively remove than hard grave hate? Say like you're in a deck with like two other breach decks, you and then somebody who's playing Rest in Peace. If that Rest in Peace is a Deathrite Shaman, are you like more likely to just like remove it the turn it comes down, and just not have to deal with it, than like letting a Rest in Peace stick around and try to go to your alt plan?
I'll almost never remove it unless it's really obvious that I can make a good-hearted win attempt and it'll hopefully go through. I really would just rather play around it than try to remove it and free up my opponents.
Yeah, I agree with
I think
that.
I think I might be more likely to like opportunistically remove it, like bounce it into a wheel is like kind of the classic example of that. Of like I'm losing access to this bounce spell anyways, whereas like so like I might as well try and get whatever value I can. So like that might be somewhere where I would be more inclined to do it to a Deathrite Shaman than to something like a Cage.
There's also it kind of scales down as the game goes on how desperately you want to remove it. Like in the early game, it tends to impact you way more than in the later game. So as the game approaches late, you'd kind of just rather the Grave Hate be there and stop Grave combos than really worry about the mana efficiency of what you're doing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Great. I think next up we have sort of just like I'm gonna group these all together because it's sort of like the holy trinity of new stacks effects that are miserable for anybody to deal with. Which is sort of just like Dranith, Breacher, and Agent.
Yeah.
You guys, I know you guys were saying earlier that you definitely play through, or at least Morgan was, that you guys play through Dranith better than a lot of decks right now. But I'm sort of interested.
Yeah,
to...
Granite is not really an issue, I think. I mean, if
So-
someone plays a deck that's actually on Granite in my meta, I'm happy if I see it.
I think the big thing here is routing through Gilded Drake. Gilded Drake is really good against all of these pieces. You don't always want to be Gilded Drake and Dranith specifically, but Gilded Drake's a really important tool against Hullbreacher in general, in my opinion, because it offers you the quick like removal of the piece, gaining its value, and the possibility of playing a Twister into it or whatever.
I also often don't mind Gilded Draking like a Dranith. Obviously, it's not like the most high value play, but
Because the Dranith's already impacting two of the other players, so you don't gain a ton of value by flipping it to you and hitting just one more opponent. So because the Dranith's already kind of exerting its force, right?
Yeah.
yeah, I certainly agree. But like, especially if it affecting my opponent and not me is like.
Right, if they're, say, a breach deck or something.
Yeah,
I don't.
Not just keeping their commander out of play, but yeah, like if they have other things that might want to be leveraging it, like against something like evolution or things like that.
And then Agent is just rough. You just can't tutor anymore, and there's no really good answer to that. I think you just kind of suffer underneath it and hope you can break parity on it by drawing cards with your commanders.
Pretty
I
much.
don't know that there's all that much. You don't really want a Gilded Drake. You don't really want to spend removal on it. It doesn't really impact them all that much to get it removed because it's already stolen a tutor or whatever. It's just kind of rough. I don't think we hate it more than certain other decks. So we just kind of keep on
I was
keeping
about to
on.
say, it's not like Cats is particularly bad into Agent. It's just that like it happens to shut off one of your main win cons, but you still do have like you have your Oracle Consult alt win con, and both your commanders still generate value through it, right? So
yeah,
cool. All right, I think that's good on playing through hate. Now we sort of have like more general play patterns. We have a couple of notes here, but I feel like this is more of an open forum type thing. I think we have sort of commander development and specifically working with Neoform here. But really anything that you guys want to talk about that you think is like noteworthy play patterns that are maybe unique to Razakats that isn't particularly obvious at first glance, or like maybe something that you want to debate that might not be popular amongst other Cats pilots.
I think that like it's hard to say too much about developing commanders because like it depends so heavily on pod texture.
That's true.
Obviously, like you want to be developing your commanders as soon as possible, I would say. But
especially Timna. I don't know if it's true for Thrasios, but Timna for sure.
But yeah, like it's just like demonstrably not always possible.
Yeah.
So like, you know, harping too heavily on that doesn't seem particularly productive.
True.
But yeah, with regards to Neoform, I have definitely gone back and forth on like Neoforming the like turn 1 land dork, turn 2 like Neoform something. There have been times where I've done it for both Oof or Dranith. And like it's typically in a hand where I don't think I have the interaction to hold the table down, and I do think whichever piece will actually stop them. But it's obviously like it's a pretty big setback on yourself to like, because not only are you losing you're losing the Neoform and the potential for it to be like an Oracle or Breacher or Agent or whatever, but you're also losing the Dork, which is potentially a third of your mana if it's like a
I feel like it's one of
turn two
those
play.
backed into a corner plays where you're looking at the table and saying, "Oh, I'm seeing Rograk in a Crom deck, and we just really need interaction right this moment." So
Yep.
you kind of utilize it that way. Whereas
I do that a
if you
lot,
can
actually.
expect, if you can expect the rest of the table to kind of hold everyone back, maybe it's more value for you to sit on your Neoform and Guild a Drake something gross later in the game, or make a Hull Breacher wheel play, or whatever it is. Like there's kind of higher ceiling plays you can make, but you really want to meet the floor of not dying.
Yeah,
Not dying is good.
In fact,
very good.
not
Again,
dying.
Hot takes only on the
In fact, I would say not dying is actually better in Razakats than a lot of decks that are currently seeing play.
Yeah, not
that is
dying.
Yes,
not dying
yes,
means
yes.
you're gonna probably see more cards than your opponent. So
Cool. So in that case, I think it's time to get to the novel and interesting parts of the podcast that everybody comes to the special episodes for, which are doing sample hands and picking up some listener questions from the Razakats server. So I think we'll do sample hands first, and sort of get through and get some discussion on those. Because I think we have some pretty interesting ones pulled up, and then we'll hop through a couple of listener questions from the Razakats Discord server and go through and answer them. So yeah, let's jump into the sample hands first. Shaper, would you like to read off this first one for us?
sure, we've got Marsh Flats, Sylvan Library, Time Twister, Forbidden Orchard, Spellseeker, Morphic Pool, Force of Will.
So first impressions, there's 3 lands, no mana acceleration, and some gas. What are the thoughts on this kind of thing?
My very first impression is that this hand is extremely slow, and I would be not inclined to keep this in a lot of pods. But it does have a few things going for it. Specifically, it's going to play a turn 2 Sylvan Library, which is not the most powerful play, but it does set you up for a relatively grindy game. But paired with that is the Force of Will, which can help you survive a little bit in the early game. And is kind of attractive next to the Sylvan Library because you are going to be able to kind of recap the card disadvantage of pitching it. I think my very first impression is that I'm going to pitch this in most pods, but I might keep this in an extremely grindy pod. I probably would keep this at maybe 5 also.
I think I'd actually definitely keep this as a 6. Just pitch one of the lands, you play the turn 2 Sylvan Library, and then you can either decide if you're feeling like you're going to be low on cards, you're looking to pitch the Spellseeker to force and then Twister, or if you think that the Sylvan Library is enough, you can pitch the Twister and then have the Spellseeker to lean towards a win.
I feel like in most cases you're going to end up pitching the Twister because it's not going to look super attractive to
probably, yes.
to play
assuming
it out.
your opponents are just dumping their hands. On 5, you definitely keep it. You just put back probably the Twister, and then just pitch the Spellseeker to force and hope the Sylvan Library gets you there.
Yeah.
I probably wouldn't keep this as a second 7 unless I was looking at a pod where I knew that Sylvan Library was going to be really, really good. And it's like this, there's some control players, so I'm not super worried about dying early. I can also just look like I kept kind of a mediocre hand and maybe try and surprise people with the Force of Will. But yeah, generally I wouldn't keep this. I'm not happy about keeping it, particularly at a full 7.
Same.
Cool.
Yeah, I think this is death for Tarot keeping it.
So
Yeah.
Pretty much.
So I think we have a pretty unanimous, we'll keep it if I have to, but I won't be happy about it. And usually we'll throw it away. Morgan, can we get you to read off the second one here?
Sure. So the next one is Misty Rainforest, Tundra, City of Brass, Tarnished Citadel, Demonic Consultation, Brainstorm, and Arbor Elf.
So
this one,
it's a 4-lander.
it is a 4-lander. But I think the line on this one somewhat is a little bit counterintuitive, which is that you would play not the Misty into the Arbor Elf turn 1, and then on turn 2, try and brainstorm. Like, you could go brainstorm, put back, like, if the brainstorm, finds you another land, put back 2 lands. If it doesn't, maybe only put back 1. And then play the Misty, crack it, and then either like hold interaction or play Thrasios or play something else you drew. But like it's just like a little weird to like play an Arbor Elf with no forest. The consult is like definitely nice because it means that you can like you can tutor for like win cons pretty easily, and I often find people don't see the neoform into Oracle coming. Like you neoform your Arbor Elf and they're like, oh, is it going to be like Collector Roof? Are you Gilded Drinking that Crom? Are you getting Draneth? You're just like, Oracle Consult? Like, so that's like a line that I find people don't necessarily expect as much. So, like, I think that the Brainstorm combined with the Fetch lets you dig yourself out of the disadvantage of starting with a 4-land hand, and then you have your Dork for extra mana, and you have Consult, which is like a very powerful and flexible card.
Cool. What do you think about, because I think there is an argument here for potentially maybe instead of trying to force off an early brainstorm to get rid of these lands, like would it depend on pod, or what if like is there a case where you use the Arbor Elf to get out an early Tymna on turn 2 instead of casting the brainstorm? And like is that case dependent on pod composition or like where you are at the table?
I think I'm brainstorming in most scenarios on turn 2 here.
Yeah, maybe it like I could see not feeling the need to brainstorm if I drew I mean, obviously like the best example I can come up with is like Fierce Guardianship. Then like perhaps I could see myself going like maybe I'll play the Tymna, get my Tymna draw, and then like brainstorm next turn. I'll have seen 2 more.
I feel
cards
like there's
at that point.
Also an argument here that you want to get your Brainstorm and your Misty Rainforest out of the way so that you're not as vulnerable to later Hull Breachers and opposition agents.
Yeah, I guess that is also an issue, is that if you, like the way this hand currently is, if you go like City of Brass, Arbor Elf, and then you don't want to play and crack the Misty because you're not casting Brainstorm, then the Arbor Elf doesn't make mana.
You also have issues if you try to develop Tymna on turn 2 here, because your Arbor Elf is not going to tap for mana unless you use the Misty Rainforest, and then you're no longer going to have it for your Brainstorm later.
It's fine. You
So,
just draw exactly.
do you think?
Mockstein.
So do you think that like potentially if you drew another fetch as your draw for turn on like the first turn in this hand, do you think that sort of weighs it more toward casting Tymna on turn 2 then?
I'm just probably not casting Tymna here. I'm probably brainstorming. I don't really think that I'm casting Tymna on turn 2 here.
Cool. Great. I just think it's always interesting to have these discussions, right, about you have this dork.
I mean, there's obviously things like cues, like if you see somebody holding up 3 mana, you might not be so inclined to brainstorm here.
Fair.
And in that situation, like it might be nice to develop your Tymna. You always want to be flexible and read the table, but I feel like you want to get the brainstorming out of the way here because a lot of your hand here is kind of dead, and you always have to worry about those kind of things later.
Yeah, in a matter where I would keep this hand, which is not mine, I probably would also opt to get the brainstorm out of the way.
Fair.
I think Reed honestly just played. He played Shuffle Hulk way too long to not fully consider the implications of being able to cast him on turn 2.
Hey, dude, in Shuffle Hulk, you gotta hold your brainstorm for as long as possible, so you can just put pieces back.
That is true.
No.
So Taro, actually,
You're not wrong if you were
interesting.
playing
So
Shuffle Hulk.
Taro, the fact that you wouldn't keep this a 7 is, I think, fairly self-evident. If you need to have interaction or some early gas to not die.
Yeah,
immediately.
I need some way to stay alive.
Would you say keep this as like a 6 or potentially even a 5?
As a 5, I probably keep it. Yeah.
Okay. Would you'd still ship this back even if it was your 6?
I probably, maybe. I'd probably ship it if it was a 6.
Interesting. Cool. Awesome. So I think unanimous from.
I might not keep this as a first 7 either.
Gotcha.
It's okay.
So I guess
this is
the
an okay
unanimous
hand.
decision here is that like it's not quite a first 7. I think Morgan, you, and Shaper would probably keep this as a second 7 or afterward, and then I think for Taro it would have to at least be a 6 or after 6.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily consider keeping it as a first
Oh,
7,
interesting.
In like again.
I mean, it depends on the pod, right? There
Yeah,
are
yeah, I'm
pods
just
where
saying,
like
I was saying in your
where you can
respective
totally keep
metas
this.
and in your respective builds and all such.
like not playing with you and Pod,
No,
but
no.
playing with like the
QMTG boys.
Kingston crowd, the QMTG crowd, yeah. I think that like this is a hand that actually like I and honestly I wouldn't even be like super concerned about getting rid of some of those lands. If I was playing in that meta, like obviously if I drew more lands then sure, but like I would often just expect to be able to play 4 lands and be pretty happy to do so
Sure.
in a lot of the games I play.
Great. All right, Taro, can we have you read off that third hand for us?
Certainly. The next hand is Assassin's Trophy, Imperial Seal, a Tropical Island, Ristic Study, Survival of the Fittest, Chrome Mox, and Lion's Eye Diamond.
Thoughts?
Which is certainly an interesting hand, but it does not keep me alive, and I'm not keeping it for that reason.
Definitely fair.
Yeah, this is a rough hand on mana sources for sure.
If you spend all your time not losing, how are you ever gonna or not dying? How are you ever gonna live? Come on.
Turns out you live longer when you don't die.
You don't really want to see the Lion's Eye Diamond here. It's kind of unfortunate. The survival also doesn't have any gas. You're looking at probably a seal into, I don't know, most likely a mana source of some variety into a Ristic Study, which is good if you can kind of ignore the rest of the table. But this hand is probably only keepable in certain kinds of pods.
The upside on your turn 1 draws here is like so high. Like a land or a dork, like both of those just give you
or a reanimation
or a
/ entomb.
reanimation spell or an entomb. Like all of those give you outs to a very early win. So like I would, or like even just playing the Ristic Study on turn 2. Like
this hand is also not the most upset about being wheeled is another
Yeah.
aspect, because you can go perhaps like Tropical Island, Chrome Mox Imprinting Trophy, seal for something pretty good, and play out the Lion's Eye Diamond, and then if you do get wheeled, you get both your Imperial Seal target, you get to crack a Lion's Eye Diamond, and you know there are a few options here.
Yeah, I think like the sort of the worst case scenario is that you draw like something more or less useless, and then you are priced into Imperial Sealing for mana. But like
A turn 2 Ristic Study isn't the worst thing.
turn 2 Ristic Study definitely isn't the worst thing, and then like you're decently well on your way to like getting Thrasios activations going. You still have this survival, which can like if you're sealing for like for example Crypt here, like you're like pretty close to just like if you can find a creature and a land that makes, I mean I guess you'd need one more if you're not on retainers, but you're just like very close to a lot of things. I think I would keep that hand. That's the kind of hand I'm into.
So I think that also sort of means that I feel like going to 6, you'd probably still keep this because you can just put the LED back, I'm assuming. Would you keep this at 5? I'm assuming yes.
I think so. I think it turn 2 Ristic Study at 5 is
It's
acceptable.
probably.
Yeah. Would you ship this away for a first 7?
I would.
I would.
Most likely, yeah. I feel like there's just a lot more potential in what you can draw than what this offers.
Yeah, that's fair. I guess actually the concern for me would be getting my Rhystic Study countered.
Yeah,
that's
definitely. If anybody at this table ever has mana drain mana, you're just very sad. All right, cool. And then we have one more hand here. This one's going to be a Snow-Covered Forest, a Verdant Catacombs, a Mox Diamond, a Mental Misstep, an Enlightened Tutor, an Opposition Agent, and a Jin Gitaxias. Core Augur. Yeah, this one's definitely interesting, right? Because you have sort of you have a bunch of these kind of options where the Enlightened Tutor has a lot of things going for it. You potentially have this like turn 2 opposition agent. You have a bit of protection. Maybe a bit down the line, you can get rid of the Jin Gitaxias. Maybe if you tutor for survival, or maybe just naturally later on.
This hand also doesn't look terrible into wheels.
Yep, you got that turn
Yeah.
turn 1 fast mana,
definitely
right?
true.
Maybe you can mental misstep somebody like trying to force a tutor in on top of the wheel.
Yep, and you
Yep.
get to Enlighten Tutor into the wheel as well. I don't know that I'm thrilled about this hand, but it is
It's not terrible.
pretty adequate.
It's decent.
I think I'm lower on this hand than you two.
I also
two land Mox Diamond is like super awkward, and like with the Jin Gitaxias in hand, I don't know how like enthused I am about e-tutoring for mana, which again,
I mean, there's also e-tutor for Survival of the Fittest, which looks pretty good with Jin.
yeah, but if you don't draw the mana, then you're like, I mean, I guess you're just slamming it on turn 2, and then like you're still decently far from actually getting there.
Well, so I think you get to hold up the tutor and make an informed play with it, which is either leading into mana into a turn 2 opposition agent, or a survival line, or even something else.
Yeah, like the if you draw the land here, then obviously that's like pretty good. Like a land or a dork here is also like very, very good. So like in many ways, it's actually similar to the hand we were looking at before. But I think that like there's less going on for me in this hand. And the mental misstep is not something I hugely value in an opener in the kinds of metas I tend to play in.
Cool.
And yeah, I'd certainly keep this on 6, because then you're just pitching the Jin, which is like,
Yeah.
like it's a 6-card hand already. So, but I don't know that I'd keep it on 7.
Not sure, but it's not the worst.
I think it's close. I could see finding this hand acceptable as like perhaps a second 7.
Yeah, maybe. Probably.
Great. So I think that is the end of our sample hands. Obviously, it's not a full range of what's available to the deck, but hopefully there was a pretty good smattering of reasonings and such.
That was all of them.
Yeah, that's all the hands. Those are the only hands that you draw when you're playing Razakats. Which is surprising, because none of them have turn 1 reanimation, which I feel like I've seen before.
Well, I think we took medium ones to walk through instead of, obvious slam keeps.
Yeah,
slam
obviously
pitches.
there are much better
Yeah.
hands than this in the deck. Obviously there are more obvious mulligans, but I feel like we covered some good ground here on sort of like stuff that's sort of borderline
We did.
or isn't like particularly your first 7, but you might want to consider further down the road. Great. So I think we're now going to hop into some listener questions from the Razakats server. We do this for every special episode. So whenever we're setting up a new special episode, we will announce it and head over to the official Discord server for that deck or archetype, whatever. Set up a channel and get some questions in from listeners. So if you're interested in that, we'll typically announce these ahead of time. And if you're an avid player, avid fan of that deck, you can go over and ask questions like this for next time. But we have all of them in, so we're going to go through a couple of the ones that we've selected that we feel like will give good content. So I'll start with the first one here from Wombat, who asks, how do you determine how much interaction you should run going to different metas with cats? Too much interaction and you lose if things get grindy. Not enough and you lose to the first person who goes for it.
I don't know that too much interaction makes you lose when things get grindy. I think it's more about like how good the cards you're cutting are going to be. So if you're in like a meta where, for example, like a card like Faber Elder might just be too slow, then like cutting that out and putting in a piece of interaction could be very appealing.
Indeed.
But I mean, I guess indirectly that does make you lose if things get too grindy, like if you just cut all your grind engines for interaction. But I think that like really you should be it's just about kind of directly evaluating the quality of the cards that you're actually looking at swapping in or out respectively.
Yeah. I mean, considering my list, which has more interaction, it actually performs well in slightly more grindy metas as well. So you can actually get away with cutting quite a bit of the grind for interaction and still be fine even in slower metas.
Yeah, to some extent, you do have to just feel out your meta and kind of bang your head against the wall. If you find yourself losing games to not being able to interact because nobody else is, then you need to put in more interaction. And that's really the only way that you can even get a sense of your meta to begin with, right? Like nobody really tells you what they're playing until they play it, for the most part. So you kind of just have to feel it out per game and see. You have to kind of analyze whether or not you want to see interaction in your early hands, or you'd rather see your grind engines and develop them really early when other people are doing the interaction for you. So basically, just be as greedy as you possibly can, but don't be so greedy that you lose.
Yeah, just
Yeah,
that's just the motto of CDH, right?
Just
I mean,
try
pretty
as
much.
hard as you can to win, but not so hard that you lose. That's
beautiful. Next up from Killer Zed, we have the how do you solve the LED problem with the Razakats line forcing you to discard your hand so you can't protect your plays? It seems like without silence enabled, the combo feels very risky to do quickly or try to do it at all.
Just have more creatures.
Yeah, so you can interact for every extra creature you have developed. So if you discard your hand to LED as you're going up the line and somebody tries to kill your or counterspell you, you can sacrifice a creature right then to go find the counterspell. So it actually doesn't prevent you from doing the combo and protecting it.
And in reality, it's often, if people are going to stop the Raza win, it's often much more likely that they actually stop the reanimation, except for maybe for cases with retainers, but generally
removal of retainers.
Generally people will try to stop the reanimation first.
I'd also think that a possible solution to this problem is in red going through dockside stuff instead of LED stuff.
Yeah, that's definitely
that works as well. Yeah,
like low creature counts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also think in very interactive metas, none of the pilots here have played it, but I do think Grand Abolisher is a reasonable consideration if you play an extremely blue meta.
I mean, Ranger Captain also does a similar thing, right?
Grand Abolisher is something I've tried to make work for a really long time. I always wanted to fit it in the deck, and whenever I did and I played it, I just found it doesn't actually protect me, so I just end up losing, even though my turn is protected. I cannot.
Yeah, I don't think your meta is quite appropriate for that, but it might be something that.
Yeah, but then I tried Ranger Captain, and it does exactly what I wanted Abolisher to do, and it protects me. And if you want to try Grand Abolisher, try Ranger Captain instead. It's amazing. It's by far one of the best cards I've ever added to the deck.
Yeah, I think like Grand Abolisher. Often your opponents will just feel like pressured to try and win like immediately, because it's like, oh well, when like people just assume that when you're untapping with a Grand Abolisher you're gonna win and there's nothing they can do about it, even if you're not actually super close to winning. So then like playing it can sort of backfire in that your opponents then are like just trying to zoom towards their own wins.
Yeah.
If they can't actually answer it.
Well, it's sometimes good and sometimes bad. Like sometimes if people feel pressured to zoom, they're going to zoom into a counterspell wall that's existed previously, and that can kind of, clear the way for you to make your plays happen.
Yeah, fair enough. People tend not to zoom into Ranger Captain though, because it just
Yeah,
that's true.
Down pretty quick.
Like maybe some people who look at my primer and see all the anti-Grixis and anti-Storm tag think Ranger Captain would only be good in that kind of meta, but I actually honestly think that Ranger Captain should be in all cat stacks, probably.
Ooh. Ooh.
I think it's really,
You hear
really,
that,
really,
Shaper?
really good.
We're just wrong.
Yes.
I guess so.
Yeah.
Ranger Captain seems fine to me. It seems like a reasonable choice.
Feels bad.
Sometimes you are just wrong. You just figure out too late in life.
It's like really rare, but I guess it does happen occasionally.
Next up from my...
I mean, it was one of those cards when I added it to the deck. It was just instantly amazing, and I'll never go back.
Cool. All right. Next up from my, we have, how does pod composition and turn order affect mulliganing and play patterns? So I feel like we've gone through sort of mulliganing a bit on this. So if you guys want to focus on sort of like
Yes.
how, like sort of like specific scenarios, maybe where your play patterns change depending on the pod, because obviously you have to sort of play an adaptive deck like this a bit differently depending on what the pod looks like.
The main thing is knowing when how much interaction you need to have and when you need to have it. I think is really important, and that kind of the opposite of that is having and deploying grind engines at the right time. So if you're looking at your pod and you see things that are likely to be Adnaw's deck, say you see a lot of Grixis, you can kind of assume that things are going to go quickly. There's going to be a lot of artifacts involved. You're probably going to need answers by turn 3, definitely, probably on turn 2 in a lot of cases.
Ideally
so
on turn 2.
You need to see where you're sitting in the pod and have your interaction ready at that moment if you don't feel like there's somebody else that's doing the same thing that you are there. And then that kind of the opposite effect kind of takes place when you look across the table and you see something like Urza or something like Paco or something like, some other mid-rangey deck that is also trying to make it to their turn 3 or 4 and deploy some large grind engine and try to take the game that way. You can kind of guess that they're going to need to be doing the same thing, and so it's weighing how greedy you can be against those kind of strategies, because you can expect like a mono blue player to have that interaction, and if you tap out for Tymna on turn 2 and there's nobody else to interact with things, then they're sort of forced to do it. So it's about how you can leverage the actual passing of turns and force your opponents to do the interacting for you as much as you possibly can and develop your own engines as fast as you possibly can without dying. And, that's a really tricky line to balance, but being good at it is how you win CDH games, so.
Yep.
Great. And then last up from Cry. I don't know. You guys would know better than me.
Cree.
Is Raza just a superior win con in general, or do you think it has more to do with the current meta, i.e. or e.g. cats can run oof, rather Naz hate effectively without being affected too much, while at the same time dodging a lot of stacks or hating the meta right now?
I think this is specifically trying to compare the deck to CST or mid-range Thrasios with Seedborn Muse and similar win cons.
Yeah.
So it's asking if the Razakats package is just superior or if it's a kind of a meta call, and I think all of these questions tend to be meta calls. Razakats doesn't always look as fantastic early, so you need the conditions to be in place to go a bit later. And I don't really think it's wrong to play, a mid-range Thrasios. I think you have good win chances playing just plain old Consultation Thrasios. But I do think that there are definite upsides in certain metas to playing Razakats, and I think here we are as proof of that with Spleenface winning Marchesa and whatnot.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't even necessarily think that that like it's a meta call, but I think that like they just offer they offer like different strengths, and like both of those strengths can have a place in the same meta. So like I don't think one's just better than the other, but even in metas where like both of them are good, which I think is a lot of meta, or like are, you know, good, like not necessarily like better than average, but like where they're both just totally adequate choices, which I think is like almost any meta for either of those decks. Like I think there are just advantages and disadvantages to both of them, and they fulfill slightly different roles in a pod.
Pretty much, yeah. I actually also think that CST and the like are actually still pretty decent, even though they sort of kind of have fallen out of favor. Specifically in my meta, because this question is from Cree, and we play a lot. He played a lot of TNT mid-range back in the day, and he really struggled with that. And my Razakats list never really did. So I think in our particular meta, this is probably because I guess I just have a higher threat density, and when I get my opportunity after some North winds were stopped, it's easier for me to actually use that opportunity in comparison to something like regular TNT midrange, which doesn't always have as easy of access to its wing cons. Like Raza.
Come on, man! You're doing this all wrong. You're supposed to say this must be true in my meta because I'm just so much better than Kree, and he doesn't know what.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm better than him. No, I love him. He's a great friend. But
I also think there's been advancements in Scepter Thrasios in terms of maybe cheese rushing, for example. I think it becomes like a little more attractive to add red to that style of deck to, you know, increase your ability to kind of win on a dime with the meta having a little more emphasis on the speed ceiling than it did during the Hulk meta where people were playing very sandbaggy. So I think that contributes to the decline in popularity of CST and Seedborn Muse and whatnot, is that there are just kind of other directions to take that deck where Razakat offers like really clear strengths for the Timna shell.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, I mean, if nobody else has anything to say about that, that about wraps it up for this episode. Before we sign off, Taro, Shaper, would you like to tell us about whatever you want to shill, where we can find you, etc., etc.? Taro, you want to take head on that?
I mean, yeah, sure. I mean, I don't really have much of a big online presence, but if you have any cats related questions, you can find me in the Razakats Discord, and feel free to ask anything.
Awesome. Shaper?
You can find me on Discord in most places. I administrate the CDH Reddit Discord. You can also find the Commander Library as my project that is a portal to the whole CDH Discord sphere, and specifically the Razakats server if you want to come learn more about the deck.
Awesome. And for the record, we'll have all the links to anything like that, as well as the Razakats Discord and the personal list for these guys in the show description, so go check those out. Give them all a like, all that good stuff. But if you'd like to reach out to any of us with any questions, comments, or concerns, you can contact us on Twitter at Into the North Pod, via our email at intothenorthpodcast@gmail.com, or on our Discord server. The invite link will also be in the description for this episode. And extra special thanks goes towards all of our patrons who help cover the expenses for our show and allow us to work toward improving the quality of the podcast. If you too would like to become a patron, we're at patreon.com/intothenorthpodcast. Another way you can support us is via our TCG Player affiliate link. Anytime you want to purchase something from TCG Player, if you use our affiliate link, which is also in the podcast and YouTube description, a portion of your purchase goes towards supporting the podcast. Thank you, as always, to the band Vox Cadre for our lovely podcast music, to Nate Slover for our equally lovely podcast logo, and to our video editor, Manta Ray Hat. Next episode will be out eventually. Until then, see ya.